Hello. Welcome to Idiobat, a Bruce Wayne podcast with your hosts, Walker, the Flying Grayson Glenn, and...
No, does that mean I have to be Batman since you
I think so.
stole
I think
Robin?
this time... Oh, you could be Batgirl in this one.
Hi, Walker. Well, that's not very PC, is it? Hi, Walker. I'm Batman. Listeners, the PC line, that is a literal line from this movie. I'm not...
Tell the listeners who you are.
I am Zach Glenn.
This is a very special episode of Idio Talk, the fourth in a series where your hosts take a break from our nonstop and exhaustive Radiohead coverage and delve into the Batman movies from our childhood. It started with us covering the 1989 Batman. Please go back and listen to that episode, a movie Zach watched every day for at least a year when we were children. The movie that we figured out both of us have probably seen more than any other movie in existence. And then, you know, once you dip your toe into that, Batman Returns was huge for us too. Batman Forever was huge for us also.
Huge.
We had a guest on that episode. Our guest, Nicole Love, was huge in her childhood as well. And now we finally get around to Batman and Robin, the 1997 follow-up, Schumacher directed, that also connects to our childhood. As much we'll find out as we get into, but in case you're a newer listener and you're very confused why you just listened to an episode about the Tom York 2019 solo album Anima, and now you're listening to us discuss Batman and Robin, it's because there is a podcast within the podcast, folks, and it is Idiobat, and I don't think you can discuss the first three in this. This is its own franchise, right? I think this is...
Yes,
there's
four
multiple
movies.
Batman franchises, but this is the one that we cover on Idiobat.
Yeah, I think that you're selling our listeners short, though, because how many of our listeners are dedicated Radiohead fans? I would think the majority of them, right?
I would hope so.
Throughout the course of Radiohead's career, when Radiohead's fourth album came out, you know, many of their loyal fans and listeners were shocked, right?
Yes.
After The King of Limbs came out, how surprised were people to hear about and listen to Atoms for Peace, their album Amok? And then how many of us, Walker, were shocked when we heard about this band, The Smile, in 2021. So I think that our listeners, as we're mirroring the arc of the band, I like to think that our listeners are too, and are like, of course, Batman and Robin is after Anima.
Sure, exactly. Right. So continuing this podcast mirroring the arc of the band, if Radiohead was a podcast, obviously what they would do after discussing Anima is discuss 1997's Batman and Robin.
Yeah, they would mirror Idio Talk. And now we're stuck in an endless loop.
Right. And so this episode is our A Light for Attracting Attention.
And with the lighting of this movie, man, that is great.
Yeah. Well, the lighting in this movie, I would call a light for making Walker vomit. So now I will say, while I love that us doing an episode about Batman and Robin is our debut of The Smile in terms of, you know, this podcast mirroring the arc of the band, it is going to put us in a difficult position when we do an episode about A Light for Attracting Attention, because famously our kid episode was our Kid A. So our Light for Attracting Attention, the timeline is getting muddy, is all I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I agree. Well, we'll think of something by the time that episode's ready.
Yeah, exactly. And also, it's appropriate for the timeline to get confusing at this point because we are 4 movies into this franchise, but
I just
3
realized,
different actors portraying Batman into the franchise.
Are The Smile is Batman Begins?
Oh, there you go. Perfect. Perfect. So at some point, us mirroring the arc of the band has separated off into its own timeline where we're no longer, by mirroring the arc of Radiohead, we have to now mirror the not even the franchise, but the intellectual property of Batman. Man, I can't wait till we get to our Jared Leto as Joker. Somehow mirroring the arc of Radiohead.
Well, that'll be in season 2 when we're covering 30 Seconds to Mars. Oh, dang it. I didn't mean to tell the fans what was coming in season 2, but now
sure.
you know. Now you
Season 2 of Idio Talk will be where we embrace chaos for its own sake. Because one thing I'll say about your hosts is some men don't want money. Some men just want to watch the world burn.
She had a vagina the size of a tangerine.
Wait, what the hell was that?
I don't know. There's some story in The Dark Knight that he had a diamond the size of a tangerine, but I
know, but why did you say that? Well, she better get it looked at then, is what I would say. Now, Zach, a Radiohead thing came just careening into my line of vision last night. And, look, well covered on this podcast that I love the Head. You know what I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm.
I'm never upset when Radiohead pops in unexpected.
You love the boys from
life.
Oxbridge.
I absolutely love all of the boys and the men. Some of the members of Radiohead are men, some are boys. I will not say who is who.
Mm-hmm.
But just some have a more boyish spirit, a more boyish lightness, I will say.
Phil Selway,
the bald boy. Normally on this podcast, we don't tie things too closely to kind of contemporary pop culture or events.
Mm-hmm.
But in this case, this episode's coming out not terribly long after release, and the show that Radiohead popped in on is actually one that is in a current season at the time of this release. So last night I was watching Yellow Jackets. Now, I will just say, first of all, that I love this show. I think it's kind of trashy, but in like the most enjoyable way.
Oh, yeah.
Zach and I both, I think we share. Are you watching the new season?
No, but I felt the way that you just described about season 1. I'm like, this is absolutely the giant air quotes worst thing that I've watched in a while, and I absolutely am fully invested and really enjoying it.
Yes, me too. And it's also, I know that both of us, as kind of a point of pride, do not fuck with anything that Showtime puts out.
No.
Because hey, why am I going to drink Pepsi when Coca-Cola exists? We have HBO.
Come on, Walker. Why am I going to listen to Muse when I could listen to Radiohead? Is what I think you meant to say.
Exactly. Thank you very much. Why am I going to vote for Joe Biden when I could vote for Donald Trump? We should cut that in case anybody doesn't think I'm kidding.
Okay.
In any case, love Yellow Jackets, and I'm getting caught up on this new season. It's only a few episodes in, but last night, my son and I went and saw the final home game of the Golden State Warriors. We won. Just a terrific night. But I got home, I'm all keyed up, and it's like 12:30 p.m., and I'm like, you know what? I'm throwing on a little YJ right now. Going to see how my girls are doing out there in that wilderness.
Oh,
now, I don't want to give any spoilers to you or to the listeners, but at the end of this episode, something very disturbing takes place that has been getting teased since the pilot, I would say. And so this very disturbing event takes place in a very cool televisual stylized way. And what do I hear coming in? Right? Coming into the soundtrack. Yeah, sure.
Well, give me the album.
Well, I want to hear just your guess.
Karma Police?
You're on the right album. Not a single.
Climbing Up the Walls.
Yes, you got it in too. Yeah. So as this disturbing, bloody event is taking place on this show about these survivors of a plane crash out in the wilderness, this girls' soccer team, we're watching something happen that we kind of know happened that has traumatized everybody in their adult timeline beyond belief, and then
So is it the crazy synth jam that's kind of over like maybe a montage is what I imagine?
Start with it was an edit. They start with the beginning of climbing up the walls, and then when shit kicks into high gear, it's doing the solo.
Go back and listen to our OK Computer episode, Take It Easy Computer. I distinctly recall when we're listening to that song, because I am a huge fan of that song. Not to say Walker isn't, but I think it's really it's one of the more 90s songs on the album, but like is totally just in the best way. But I keep saying that like I feel like this would go great in a Danny Boyle film, or he would use it, similar to like in 28 Days Later when Cillian Murphy's character is walking around the city. And I just love that somebody used it, not at that level or anything like that. But yeah, I just feel like it's been underutilized in TV and film.
Totally. And this brought up a couple things for me. I mean, this what is going to be, I think, a huge episode in the overall series run ends with really epic use of climbing up the walls. This made me think about a couple things. So this show has two timelines. One takes place in present day. One takes place in 1997.
Present tense.
Oh, I like that. Now, one reason I think this show works, I was realizing last night, is because in the 90s timeline, they don't overemphasize the 90s nostalgia.
Wow, they did in season 1, though, with the
maybe
girl
so.
Being... But yes, I agree.
No,
I've seen worse.
I think that one advantage it has is that after the pilot episode, these people are all surviving in the woods. And so it's not
for sure.
It's not nostalgia porn of just constantly bombarding you with 90s references.
Why are you depressed? Oh, Kurt Cobain just died.
Right. Exactly. And I think that like people do talk about the things that they are experiencing in the time they live in, and there is always a vernacular for every like time and place and things like that, but it just is like the shows that kind of stand the test of time better are less egregious. I think even other shows that I think are great start out doing that much more heavy-handedly and then get away from it. Mad Men is an example. In the first season, it's much more punching you in the face with like, look how ignorant in 60s everybody is being all the time, and then you slowly adapt to the setting, and it's having to emphasize that less. I don't think Yellow Jackets is as good of a show as Mad Men, but I think similarly, as we get later into season 1 and into season 2, they are not doing that as much, especially because the characters in the 90s timeline are removed from society because they're all surviving in the woods.
Yeah.
This leads me to say the 90s timeline takes place in 1997. OK Computer was released in 1997. Do these poor girls in Yellow Jackets know about OK Computer? And I think we would need to look up the timeline of when they land in the woods in 1997.
Well, I know OK Computer was released on May 21st, 1997 in the United States, at least.
Okay, so hold on. Let me look up.
And it's a soccer tournament, I believe. So I think, Walker, that they missed it because a soccer tournament, to me, it feels like springtime. Juliette Lewis's character is going to be coming back to real life and popping on some OK Computer, if not even Kid A, though. So I'm not too worried about them.
I'm just looking up, when did the Yellow Jackets plane crash?
Yeah, it says in 1996, a New Jersey high school soccer team travels to Seattle for a national tournament.
Okay, so OK Computer had come out.
No, OK Computer is 1997.
Right. So right. So it becomes 1997. So this show and this scene that takes place in 97 is being scored with, I mean, is this the unexplored? I mean, this show deals with the trauma of the death of friends, siblings, cannibalism, survival. But left on the table is the trauma of being in high school in 1997 and having no idea that OK Computer has come out and redefined popular rock and roll.
Well, no wonder they're resorting to such barbaric tendencies out in the woods. They hadn't had the cultural awakening that OK Computer provides for all who are exposed to it immediately. I don't know about you, but I became 1,000 times more cultured after hearing OK Computer.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, as I think we just discussed on our OK Computer episode, I heard it was like, this is the most mind-blowing thing I've ever heard. I'm going to go listen to Linkin Park for the next 5 years. So what do you think about all that? Do you think that that's being discussed in the writer's room as they write this needle drop? Like that, hey, part of the reason these characters are acting this way is because they haven't had the mind expanding experience of listening to OK Computer on CD.
I certainly do. And I also think, that I think that was absolutely a conversation and kind of a way that they would structure the moment. Probably first thing, they're like, okay, we don't know what's going to happen. How do we get Radiohead in here? That's probably where they start every season or episode. And this time, it still has to get past a certain barrier. So I think the writers have always started there, but at this time it made it all the way up to the suits and they allowed it. But these girls have listened to the Bends. Yeah. So it's not like they just think Radiohead is the creep band.
No, not at all. But I think that more kind of broadly speaking, what I think is really neat is that, I don't know. This would be a better question for Kailani, my wife, because she, is pretty into fashion, but much more so than I am. And so she's really good at like aligning, like, oh, the trends are, and not that she follows all these, but like right now, 1998 is really in or whatever. Like she can get it down pretty well. I'm not saying she's always right, but she tends to be pretty on the money. And what I think, Walker, is that we are, Stranger Things typified and really put a magnifying glass on how into 80s culture the culture was in 2016. Well, it keeps moving, but it doesn't move year to year. And, Friends, the show, listeners,
Friends has a huge Gen Z audience.
We were on a break. Yeah, but I think that Gen Z is about to take a break from Friends because a lot of folks are noticing that that Friends is a little bit culturally dated in some way, as things are.
That Friends could be called White Friends.
That and that, Joey's gallivances could be called date rape.
Yes. Yeah,
but
Joey.
Actually, I love Joey.
Such a funny character, but like so some great. Of the things that they pass off as
Joey
that he does are sociopathic.
Yeah, they're very, very unethical at best.
He's like if
Bill Cosby was like your buddy.
I was gonna say
no, it's not bad, listeners.
I'm only thinking of the actor's name, and for Dennis. He's like if Dennis on It's Always Sunny was played as charming instead of like a salty psychopath.
Yeah, and listeners, I understand there's context. I'm definitely grossly exaggerating, but yeah, I think that Friends is an enjoyable watch. But like people turn on things a lot nowadays, and I'm not immune to that either. So all I mean to say is that of course Radiohead redefined the late '90s with OK Computer. It's an album that Walker and I both adore, but it's my opinion that they really came to define the early 2000s more so than they defined the end of the 90s. And this is with hindsight. In fact, even if you look at, I was having this conversation with a non-Radiohead fan in kind of a jokey way.
Why were you talking to them?
Oh, she's a good friend of mine.
No, I'm just
but we have different interests. No. But she was stoked at a trivia question she got right at a trivia game she went to. And she's like, it was who was Rolling Stone's greatest artist of the 2000? And she's like, and the answer was Usher. And I'm like, I'm sorry, that answer is patently wrong. I know for a fact, without looking at my phone or anything, that Radiohead have been rated by Rolling Stone as the greatest band of 2000. And then we popped it in, and it was like she bet Billboard. But I just think that Radiohead are about to make another strong comeback in the zeitgeist with maybe a new generation. We've talked a lot about Stanley Kubrick, and I would love to say that I've loved Kubrick since I was 5 years old, but that's not the case. He really became an artist that I love and appreciate at the level of Radiohead about 5 to 6 years ago. And I just think that artists like Kubrick, and not necessarily Radiohead, I understand they're one of the most currently successful modern bands, but I do think that they're about to have a refresh on their relevance with a new generation. And I'm really excited that we timed our podcast intentionally in line with that. So
they'll be like, hey, I love Radiohead. Where can I hear the best and only commentary on this band? Walker and Zach, Idiot Talk Radiohead podcast.
Oh, right. So we're about to get the runoff of this.
Yeah, we're about to get more listeners than just you and I.
Now, to be fair, our significant others also, well, actually mine doesn't listen to the show. So
That's okay. We got at least 3 of us.
I love what you're predicting here, because this was my thought too as I saw this last night, because I know this show Yellow Jackets is really big with the youngs. And and I'm like, oh my gosh, a bunch of young people are watching this right now going.
Really broad audience, honestly.
Yeah, true. I mean, what's brilliant about this show is that I think very consciously the two
Dual
timelines.
casting.
Yes, the two timelines totally trap a huge age quadrant, because even
you get
though
your Ever After fans, you get your Natural Born Killers fans, you get your Black Snake Moan fans, and then you get your fans for all these whoever these young fuckers are.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, I know that if you were like probably 25 or under, you would identify yourself with the young actresses playing these high school seniors. But even though the grown-up version of these characters is a decade older than me, it's like obviously I feel much more in line with what they're going through but all that to say, a bunch of young people watched this episode a couple weeks ago and heard Radiohead for the first time.
Sure.
And are they listening to us right now? And to them I say Generation Z and Generation Alpha, which is Ollie's generation. If any,
oh, really?
Yeah, if any 12-year-olds have bad parents who are letting them watch Yellow Jackets, welcome to the show.
I'm just laughing at the idea of a 12-year-old with a bad parent. We know that that's not the case in America.
No, of course not. Everybody has good parents. Everybody's parents are doing their best, and that's good enough. And hey, if it sucked for me, why should it be any better for you? Is a great parenting ethic that I.
Now, were you 12 years old, or were you almost 12 years old on June 28th, 1997, when Batman and Robin came out? I guess you would have been almost 11. So never mind.
Yeah, okay, I was almost 11. And let's get into this movie. So Batman and Robin, this is the last one of the Batmans from our childhood. The Batmans from here on out will be, gosh, well, I mean, I was a full-on young grown-up when Batman Begins came out, right?
Yeah, I was 16 years old, so you would have been 19.
Yeah, okay, so that's crazy. That's crazy that there wasn't a Batman during my adolescence. This
killed the franchise.
Well, let's talk about it. Let's get into it. So Batman and Robin, the end of an era for sure, both in terms of this podcast and the Batman franchise itself. Get into it, Zach. What is the overview, background, and kind of production information about 1997's Batman and Robin?
Man, I would love to, Walker. I'm sorry. I need to get my front page of notes out that are handwritten. Just a second.
And isn't this movie so 1997 that it honestly should, the way you have like Baz Luhrmann's Elvis or something, it should be an above the title, like 1997 presents Batman and Robin.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's just to backtrack, listeners, I said June 27th, or it was released on June 20th, 1997. And as we just covered in exhaustive detail, OK Computer was released May 21st, 1997. That's it here in the States. May have had a slightly earlier United Kingdom release date, but same month.
So people are still barely even processing how much their mind has been blown by OK Computer when all of a sudden the Clune Dog comes swinging into theaters. Like what cultural whiplash we must have been having at this time.
Well, absolutely. We were talking about how writers are always prioritizing Radiohead in their their script or their moment or whatever, and I think that
you feel them looming over this production for sure.
Well, yes, but because it was made by people that maybe lack in what we would call traditionally defined as like intelligence, I would say, I think that they interpreted the title of the wonderful album OK Computer as okay, computer, like, let's embrace it, because there are a lot of digital effects.
Like, okay, computer, let's go.
Let's see what you can do. Yeah.
Let's do like an MS Paint quality teardrop freezing on Arnold Schwarzenegger's face and then breaking into ice dust.
Yeah, and I mean, just like the way that the technical department of this movie, you can occasionally stumble into brilliance by just using the like basic applications on your desktop or even on an iPad. You are going to hit some cool looking things, whether they are of substance or not. But just sort of like brass tacks about this film. It was directed by Joel Schumacher. I think Walker mentioned that earlier, but Joel Schumacher obviously directed, or not obviously, but he had directed Batman Forever, whereas the first two films in this franchise were directed by Tim Burton. So they're sticking with the director. It was written by Akiva Goldsman. Akiva Goldsman did win an Oscar later on. So just we'll hang on to that and we'll talk about that.
And he was one of the three writers of Forever, him with that husband and wife team. But he's left that polycule and now is striking out single.
Yeah, what was it? The Bachelors, I believe.
I think so. Yeah,
the characters based on the characters created by DC Comics and Bob Kane and Bill Finger. This was at the time when Bill Finger was still not getting credit as contributing to the IP, but we definitely want to make sure we do that on this show. It was produced by Peter McGregor Scott. So this is where I think I mentioned in
holy shit
Batman Forever episode. Yeah, that like because he was the producer on that film as well. But this is where they got McGregor's syndrome, which is a critical plot point. Listeners, we'll cover that.
What a weird. So he's like, "Hey, look, I'll bankroll this thing, but you're gonna name a rare disease after me."
Yeah, or maybe that was the writers not so cleverly taking a pot shot. I'm not sure, but
I would say in that case, this whole movie is suffering from McGregor syndrome.
I know, no shit. Something that is indefinable, but
not clear what it is at all.
The cinematography was by Stephen Goldblatt. It was edited by, and I want to really highlight these two folks because edited by, I would put in giant air quotes. It was edited by Dennis Verkler and Mark Stevens. The music is by Elliot Goldenthal. And really, I don't even know why there needs to be a credit. It's probably some like SAG thing or something like that, because this is just the exact same music. There's nothing new in this movie that wasn't used in Batman Forever.
There is something new in this, which is that stupid fucking like hackier than hack Poison Ivy theme.
Oh yeah,
that plays like the like jet. Yeah, it's like every time Uma Thurman is in frame, it plays like the Jessica Rabbit music and like has about as much subtlety.
I'm glad that you mentioned, even just from a character, Roger Rabbit, because I'm going to bring up Roger Rabbit in a little bit.
He's never far from our thoughts.
No, and never far from this movie either. So the running time, it's a whopping 2 hours and 5 minutes. That is the same length as Batman Returns. They're all about the same length except for the first one, but I just find it interesting.
It's
because
2 hours and 5 minutes, and you feel all 6 hours of it.
That's what I was going to say. The budget of this film, this is before marketing costs, was 125 to 160 million. The reason there's a $35 million kind of estimation there is because it did go over budget. And then the marketing budget, or marketing costs rather, for this film were extensive. Folks, this is information that I've just learned kind of through listening to podcasts about film from people who understand it a lot more than I do. But man, recouping your costs on a film of this scale or any film, in modern day, I think Batman versus Superman had a marketing expense of $250 million. And that's usually on top of production costs. So it was very difficult for this movie to make a recoup. Its box office worldwide was $238 million. And so it didn't even break even when you incorporate the marketing costs.
And I'm adjusting that for inflation. That's about 187 500,000 today.
Man,
but that's still that's kind of quaint for a superhero movie budget by today's standards, right?
You can. They're usually about 200 to 250 mil. I bet the new Thor movie was probably about 225 million. But I mean, even up to 2007's Spider-Man 3. I think that movie was the most expensive movie ever made at the time, and that had a production budget of $200 million. So it's only recently that they've started exceeding such surpassing 200 to 250. But The background of production,
I was almost able to then slightly excuse this movie based on like, is that maybe not that big of a superhero? So, okay. So it's just, they just don't know how to spend it.
all 3 Lord of the Rings movies, the Peter Jackson films, were made for a combined of $275 million. So each one of those first 3 movies was made for about $90 million. And they're some of the best looking films I've ever seen, regardless how you feel about them. They look incredible.
Jesus Christ. Wow.
So just a little bit of background on the production.
Schumacher.
And I want you to interject anytime in this, Walker. Not going to be as lengthy as before, folks. I do want to just quickly shout out myself and say that I was looking for other sources besides IMDb and Wikipedia. And I used to be a subscriber to the comic and movie magazine Wizard. And I was looking through my collection, and I did have an older Wizard zine that came out, I don't know, probably in like January, February of 1997, talking about this movie with some production photos and stuff like that. And they make it look pretty cool. The production stills were not as much of an indication as how bad this would look. But honestly, the same information that is contained there is pretty much widely available online. But yeah, it was just interesting for me to see how Wizard can make something look cool, even in hindsight of having seen the movie. But Batman Forever reset the franchise in terms of its financial success and viability. Not to say that Batman Returns was a total underperformer, but it really was relative to the first one. And obviously we talked about the tone that was needed for a change, or perceived to be needed. But yeah, Warner Brothers Studios fast-tracked pre-production on this film after the success of Batman Forever. And it was clear at the outset and understood between Joel Schumacher and Val Kilmer that he would not return as Batman. I mean, the quotes from Schumacher are kind of vague and not really worth repeating, but it sounded to me like somebody asked him and he was just like thinking and really stoned, because he said he kind of just quit and he just walked away. And it's like, okay. But
really, we covered in Batman Forever that was a very contentious relationship.
It was. And Val Kilmer wasn't available for scheduling, whether or not he would have come back, but he was going to do The Island of Dr. Moreau and The Saint. Have you seen either of those movies?
I've never even heard of The Saint. I know The Island of Dr. Moreau is a notoriously hellish production because of in at least in part because of Brando's kind of like unhinged mental illness at that point.
Yeah, it is unwatchable. It is so bad. I've suffered through it once, never again. So George Clooney was obviously cast, and we'll go through the cast person by person here in a second. But Oscar winner Akiva Goldsman, as we talked about, expressed concerns about the notes he was given from the studio as he was writing and submitting his script, right? And Joel Schumacher's general response to these concerns from the studio was that the movie needed to be as toy-friendly as possible. And this is a really interesting detail to me because it provides context for what some of my overall take on the movie is, which we'll cover later. But, you know, toy manufacturers, high execs were present at the table when they were designing the costumes, when they were planning the production. So it's just a total... one might say cash grab at the outset, you know, without really focus on the movie itself, but more on the merchandising, which is just, you know, it's just depressing, but whatever.
Can I just interject there? I don't even really see that in this movie. I don't even really see, maybe this is just adult brain, but I don't even really see the toy aspect of it. Well, I can see it more in Forever, honestly, because of all the like, the costumery of Two-Face and the Riddler. Like, I don't know. I don't really see there isn't even any really like big like Batmobile scenes or like.
Well, the merchandising was more of a flop though. Than it was on Forever. So I think you're making a great point, because like you watch Star Wars and Walker. Oh, I'll speak for myself. I was a little too old. Being born in 1989 to get like what are considered collectible Star Wars toys now. Sure. But, we certainly had them. But I still to this day don't watch Star Wars and be like, oh, I want a toy Millennium Falcon. When I see those things, they make complete and total sense. And this Star Wars is the most successful example of this of all time. When I see Batman, the animated series, when I see even Batman Forever, which I will just say right now, I think is a better movie than this. I don't see that it's meant to be so merchandised. When I see this movie, I see that the Batman suit, Poison Ivy, Bane, they all look like toys on screen, which did not translate to a more successful merchandising opportunity. So it just goes to show you should not make a movie with that in mind. And we could even compare like the Star Wars prequels to the originals in that way, right? Those look like a lot more merchandised and were actually less successful. And people still buy toys nowadays. It's not a matter of people only want PlayStations.
That's okay. Now I get it more. So it's like everything is toy-like, which is, to me, I'm glad flopped.
Mr. Freeze, for sure.
That is like very condescending to your audience of young kids. Because I think that,
I totally agree.
Yeah, that's it. It's treating your audience like it's stupid, and I'm glad they were appropriately reprimanded by the hidden hand of the market.
Yeah, no, I agree. And just before we dive into the cast, I just want to say, kind of in the background, Arnold Schwarzenegger's casting created a high amount of buzz and anticipation. And I just have a quick story on this. I can remember coming back from our grandparents, driving back, and the radio was on. It was talk radio. I don't know what we were listening to, but I wasn't listening to it, but it was on. And my mom turns down the volume, and she goes, "Zach, did you hear that?" And I said, "What?" And she played a little guessing game with me, and she said, "There's a new Batman movie coming out, and guess who's going to play Mr. Freeze?" And so I guessed, and I think on the third guess or so, I guessed Arnold Schwarzenegger. And I just remember that's just such a distinct memory because I was so excited because I love Batman even at age 7, I guess I was. And I think there was just general buzz and anticipation, the fact that Arnold was in a Batman film as one of the villains. You know, they didn't know how bad it was going to be. And kids, Arnold is still an icon. Kids, you know, whoever may be listening, but I do think that Arnold is fading from the public consciousness, you know, as focal points, you know, of the culture tend to do. But I mean, this would be analogous to Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. You know, I think he is a much more, I don't know about sophisticated. He certainly has a lot more of a range as an actor than Arnold does. I'm not saying Arnold's not a smart guy, but to me, it's like that's the only possible example of who lines up in modern day.
Yeah.
Would you like to add anything before I go through person by person?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I don't have anything to add about your analysis of Arnold, but your story of how you found it out remind me of a very like dead technology way that I found out about a Batman thing too. I don't know if I've ever told you this. So you found out about this casting on terrestrial radio.
Mm-hmm.
I found out about at the time, forthcoming Batman the Animated Series, a show that we both grew up on that I know has aged really, really well.
Mm-hmm.
I found out that was coming out through a newspaper article in the Sacramento Bee. And it was the same thing. Mom pulled it out of the paper and was like, "They're making a new Batman cartoon," and gave me the like newspaper article to read. Can you imagine a time where somebody put to a printing press, "Hey, a new Batman cartoon's coming out"?
I know. I love that. And I love that our mom was supportive of our interest in Batman. It's a sweet little memory. So yeah, just kind of quickly going through the cast. This is a loaded one, which is also very interesting. But Arnold Schwarzenegger, and I'm going to go through an order of billing. So Arnold Schwarzenegger, he was paid $25 million in this role to play the characters of Dr. Victor Freeze and Mr. Freeze. Now, I will note Victor Freeze is spelled F as in Frank, R as in Robert, I as in Indigo, E as in Edward, and then S as in Sam. So it looks like fries, but it's
right. But that is how you say the name Freeze.
But they pronounce it Freeze though. Like freeze. There's no difference between the two. It's just so silly of a lack of creativity. Anyways, so his background.
Yeah, but hey, honestly, if you're gonna turn into like a guy whose whole thing is ice, like you could do a lot worse than having your Christian name being Freeze. You're really close.
And it is Austro-Hungarian, so in origin, just like the actor. He plays a molecular. Yeah, he's from Austria.
Oh, okay. I thought
and then the name Schwarzenegger and Freeze would be from like Austro-Hungarian.
Oh, okay. I thought
origin.
He was American. Go ahead.
Your screen froze, so your face was totally serious. Anyways, so guys, listen to this. So folks, listen. He's a molecular biologist who suffers an accident while trying to cryogenically preserve his terminally ill wife. As a result,
what's she terminally ill with?
McGregor's disease or syndrome.
Yeah,
it's
or
a syndrome.
Right? They call it a disease and a syndrome at different points.
Anyways, so as a result, he's forced to live in Sub-Zero suit that is powered by diamonds. I'm not going to do a bio on every single character, but I could not help myself with that one. We got George Clooney as the title character, one of the title characters. He's playing Bruce Wayne in Batman. And then Eric Lloyd is a young Bruce Wayne, because there are more than one flashback in this film of Bruce running through hallways as a child. Chris O'Donnell is back as Dick Grayson / Robin. So he's Batman's sidekick. Uma Thurman is playing Dr. Pamela Isley in Poison Ivy. So she's a botanist turned eco-terrorist and wants to kill Batman for some reason because of that. Yeah. Alicia Silverstone, they must have been clueless with this casting, because she plays Barbara Wilson / Batgirl. We got the main character of the film, Michael Gough, is back as Alfred Pennyworth. And we still have Pat Hingle as Commissioner James Gordon, and I think that's police commissioner, but for some reason he's dressed as a 5-star general in every scene in this film. And then we have Elle Macpherson as Julie Madison. This is Bruce Wayne's girlfriend, who also is suffering from a syndrome. I'm not going to say what kind. And then we have
what guy? I don't get what you're implying.
We'll call it vacant syndrome. She's completely
Zach,
vacant.
When you just said those two names, Elle Macpherson and what was the other name?
Her character is Julie Madison.
Either of those could have been the character name. I would have. This is. We'll get into it, but a lot of great roles for women in this movie.
Oh my god! Well, I'm almost done, but I got another titular female character coming up. So we have Michael Reed McKay. He plays Bane before the accident when he is injected with venom. So when he's still a skinny crackhead, I think. We got Vivica A. Fox as Vandanella Kaiserbaum. She plays Mr. Freeze's assistant and cryogenically frozen wife. So what I was saying, Vivica A. Fox is his assistant, and then Vandella Kaiserborn is the wife that Mr. Freeze has in the glass tank. Sorry. So
do either of those characters have names, or are they wife and assistant?
I couldn't find a name for Vivica A. Fox's character.
Okay. Appears in exactly one scene.
Yes, exactly. Elizabeth Sanders is playing Gossip Gertie. She's Gotham's top gossip columnist, and by the way, she is the wife of Bob Kane.
Yes.
And then
returning
we have
from Forever.
Yes, absolutely. But returning from Forever, but as different characters, is Michael Paul Chan and Kimberly Scott. They both appear as the telescope scientists. Now, Kimberly Scott played his assistant, Maggie.
Thank you. I was like, oh, Maggie's back. But then I looked it up and it wasn't Maggie.
No, she's one of the telescope scientists. And listeners, you might remember her as One Night from the Abyss. Those are the only other movie I've ever seen him in. And final credit, I'm sure there's a lot of extras I missed.
Wait, and that other guy, I'm sorry, what's the actor's name? Because I assumed
Michael Paul Chan.
He's not the same guy who works at Wayne Industries?
Well, he might be the same character, but he's like a floor supervisor on like the technical division. And I realize telescopes are deeply technical, but he doesn't seem to be an engineer. He seems to be like taking what would be Ed Begley Jr.'s position. He's good at Edward.
And Maggie seemed like a more of like
executive assistant,
kind of like office manager.
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean,
maybe
I don't
they
know
are
how
the same characters, and we're just being like limited in what we think.
Maggie is not the same character. She is not a scientist in Batman Forever, and I don't know how deep we want to go on the racial insensitivity in this film. But I really felt like they were just to diversify the audience, which is done in, not the audience, but the cast, which is done in the most offensive ways throughout this film. But we'll get to that.
I think that you are giving the film too much credit if you think it even poorly executed the positive intention of having a diverse cast.
Perhaps,
I don't think it was concerned with that in any way whatsoever.
There's a scene that I don't know the intention of, but I'm comfortable saying is so offensive and dated coming up. But we're not there yet. Final cast member I wanted to reference is rapper Coolio. Makes a cameo appearance as Jonathan Crane. Later stating that, so he plays the person at the bike race. You know, remember? That's Coolio. He's listed as Jonathan Crane, who is the Scarecrow in the comics. And he was set to reprise his role as the Scarecrow in the ultimately canceled sequel, Batman Unchained. They were going to name a movie Batman Unchained.
That's the most, everything you're saying to me is sick and insane.
It's so insane. But Yeah, I have a little bit more in the background of production, but I feel like I want to let you interject some thoughts, anything at all on the cast.
No, I have been gleefully interjecting as things come up for me. Please continue.
So yeah, I talked about how the box office success led to them wanting to continue this tone of the franchise, which I guess meant just making money hand over fist. They rehired director Joel Schumacher to pilot this film, which I guess if something ain't broke, you don't need to fix it. But
it was broke, and it was
broke. Yes. So Schumacher wanted to pay homage to the campy style of the 1960s television series, as he had done with the previous film. And the storyline of Batman and Robin was conceived by Schumacher and Goldsman during pre-production on 1996's A Time to Kill. Have you seen that movie?
No, I want to talk about Schumacher more broadly, but not when you're discussing the background of the film. I need some help if you've seen more of his filmography, like contextualizing this guy.
No, for sure. So I talked about how Goldsman expressed concern, and Schumacher's response was basically, this needs to be toy friendly. I don't want to linger on that too long. But I will just say, I have a note here that Mr. Freeze's blaster was specifically designed by toy manufacturers, Batman creator Bob Kane and Bill Finger. But Batman creator Bob Kane only acted as an official consultant and was heavily involved in the production, giving input on the film script as well as on set. So I say that to attempt to exonerate Akiva Goldsman. I mean, the films that he won an Oscar for is A Beautiful Mind, which is a movie that is laughably bad, and it won Best Picture. And I don't know if Russell Crowe won Best Actor that year, but I know he was nominated. And it just shows you how poorly things can age. But I say that to give Akiva Goldsman a little bit of exoneration, because I really think that who knows what his original script looked like. It seems like it was just chewed up and spit out by so many different people. A note from Chris O'Donnell was just that he was delighted to work with a new actor, but he did feel that he and Val Kilmer, he enjoyed working with him, so he's a little bit bummed. But Chris O'Donnell, he's not had an enduring career. But from everything I've read from these two films, he seemed like he had a really good attitude, really gave it his best. Whether his best was a good performance, we could talk about, but I don't know. I just enjoy that. I don't know. He doesn't have any negative lore stories around it, but he basically put his best foot forward, is what he was trying to say, and what everyone said on production. But his costume was altered such that wearing the face mask was really, really painful and made sweat pool. That didn't happen in the last movie. It was just a very uncomfortable experience for him, and he really tried to lead the production. He and Arnold Schwarzenegger both had the best attitudes on set, is what it reported. And on the one hand, you could say,
did this move? Oh, sorry.
On the one hand, you could say Arnold was paid $25 million. Darn right, he should keep the best attitude. Sure. But, Arnold is at the twilight of him still being able to keep in shape. In 1997, he looks great. He worked out tirelessly for the role. His contract had to have a written clause in it that he couldn't work more than 12 hours in a day because of some health concerns he had, because Arnold is known for pulling 14 to 18-hour days when on set, and does have a good reputation in terms of his decorum and behavior by and large. I'm sorry if I'm missing something, but I admire that. I admire people that work hard even if they're paid outrageous sums of money. And you are missing
the thing where he had like a secret second family.
Yeah, that wasn't on set.
Okay, fair enough.
He doesn't have any reputation of brandoing it, for instance.
I got it.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I don't believe and I don't agree with all his political positions or anything like that. I'm just saying his performance on the job is renowned for how hard he works.
He's a pro.
Like
He's a pro.
He's an absolute fucking pro. And I think he and Uma, I will just say, I think that they put in the most effort in terms of their acting. But we'll come to that later. We talked about George Clooney's casting. Joel Schumacher was a big fan of working with him. He had seen him in, I thought this was so funny, Walker, in, what is that, Dusk Till Dawn.
Yeah.
And he thought, that guy's my Batman, which I just love. That was what Schumacher saw and was like, and that person should play Batman, cracked me up. But I don't have a lot more on that. I was like, that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, Clooney had only done a couple movies.
Yeah, he was still Mr.
ER. Yeah.
Yeah,
and I remember that being and man, I am such a George Clooney fan, and I really found myself. I mean, this is such a dumb thing to experience a moment of conscious gratitude for, but I'm like, I am so glad that like filmmakers like the Coen brothers and Soderbergh figured out how to use this guy, and that we got some of the stuff we did from him, because he is so great as like, kind of either like a self-aware tomcat or kind of like lovable prick or pretentious idiot,
Yeah.
and
Yes, absolutely.
And I don't think you definitely see the charm in this, but you don't see a hell of a lot of anything else. And I'm really glad that this did not put him in movie jail, because I really, really enjoy him in other stuff.
He says that it did put him in movie jail, and this is so sweet, listeners. He said he deserved it, which I think is just so generous. I think George Clooney seems like a very generous actor. He can be very funny. He is obviously very handsome in a particular kind of way. But I just appreciate the level of ownership that he has taken for something that is ultimately not his fault. I don't believe. I mean, his performance is lackluster, but I think that has to do with the constriction of the suit and the baffling nature of the scenes themselves. I mean, Chris O'Donnell is certainly bringing more energy, but I don't think that makes the performance any better. But yeah, I mean, to your point, I just think directors have found a great way to utilize his skills as an actor. I recently just watched for the first time a movie called The Ides of March, which he co-wrote the screenplay of and directed. And it is a terrific movie, in my opinion. He and Ryan Gosling, and it's a deeply cynical look at American politics. And I just mentioned that just because I think George Clooney, they don't look the same, but he very much reminds me of Mitt Romney in that movie. And they're sort of a similar archetype. And I just love that he has and it came out in 2011. So Mitt Romney was probably, gaining momentum in the zeitgeist as an Obama opponent. But Mitt Romney is more just a political cardboard cutout,
Cipher.
Yes, exactly. And I just think that it's really cool that George Clooney, to write a movie that good obviously shows a level of talent and creativity that, I think is easy to maybe overlook. But, just going back to,
can we stay on this for a minute?
Oh, please. Just
because it came up organic. You're talking about something that is in my notes to discuss, and we're talking about it, so might as well do it here.
Yeah.
I don't know that I've ever actually seen any of the George Clooney directorial efforts, as a matter of fact.
I think this is my first.
Okay, because he's directed 3 or 4 movies.
Oh, really? Okay.
He directed it's kind of panned, but he directed Suburbicon, which is a Coen Brothers script.
Seen that.
Which I've heard is better than it gets credit for.
I would agree. Yeah, I didn't hate it.
And he directed Good Night and Good Luck, which I think was definitely up for Best Picture. I don't know if
I did not realize that he wrote that.
I don't know if he wrote it. He directed it.
I'm sorry, that he directed it.
But he may have written and directed it. But he for sure directed it. And he has another, Confessions of a Dangerous Mind, I think is a movie that he directed, which on his WTF, Marin was going on about how much he loves that movie. So anyway,
wow.
That's actually not what I wanted to say. What I wanted to say is I also came across his comments about how bad he is in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was gracious. He's also in a position where he has come so far past this in his career that he can kind of safely comment on it not working, because he does have some words for the film itself, that it is not well directed, that the script is a mess. But he says, but I was bad in it. And he's kind of basically saying like, I was a raspberry, and everyone involved is kind of like owned that.
Yeah.
So, okay. I like that he said he was bad in it. If you're going to shit talk the movie, you should spare some criticism for yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think he is bad in this. And I don't know what being good in this movie would be.
Right.
Like, I literally, because when he walks in, there are a couple moments where I see a little bit of the George Clooney charm, and I start to kind of like Bruce Wayne a little bit, and then it like instantly evaporates as soon as anybody has to say anything that is written in this movie. And the tone of it is so egregiously, obnoxiously just like B movie,
right,
that I just literally don't know who, because the only other like actor that in this movie that I think that I would say I consider to be a really good actor based on things I've seen them in outside this movie is
Alicia Silverstone.
Is Thurman.
Yes.
And and I think she sucks in this movie too, but I don't know what I would have her do differently either, except be in a different movie.
I don't know how you could say what being good in this movie would look like either. I think that's really well put. I think in terms of commitment to the role, I think Schwarzenegger and Thurman are the most committed. And rightfully so. On the case of Schwarzenegger, he's paid, like I said, $25 million. A couple of funny things and I don't want to just bypass Clooney, but can I tell you a couple of funny Schwarzenegger things about this movie?
Yes, because I actually do think he is the best part of the movie.
Yes. So
I like what you're saying, that he committed to it so much, because he makes me laugh a few times in parts that feel like they're supposed to make me laugh.
Yes, I agree. And I would say Clooney does that in parts that aren't supposed to, but that's a way that I really appreciate his timing in this film, is he is the funniest, where I think it's up for debate if he knew the tone of the scene or not. But before they cast or got Schwarzenegger, they were looking at Ed Harris. Okay, could make sense. He's another bald, chiseled gentleman. Anthony Hopkins, no. But maybe in like more of the Heart of Ice vein, if they're going to take it seriously, Anthony Hopkins at this time could have worked. But
I
it's
like
funny
Ed
to go
Harris. I would like that.
Yeah. Patrick Stewart, where they were all considered for the role of Mr. Freeze. Patrick Stewart has since like vehemently denied that he was up for it, but who cares? I just thought that was interesting. Mr. Freeze's armor was made by an armorer, Terry English, who estimated that the costume cost over $1.5 million to develop and make. And I just want to hone in on that, because it does look very plastic and bad. But when you see this thing on display at Warner Brothers lots, or Warner Brothers store, I'm not sure where it's on display, but it looks incredible. And there are moments where throughout the film where I'm like, oh, whoa, like I wouldn't have gone with this design, but you could tell that the suit isn't as bad as it looks almost all the time. And maybe that's just my opinion. I don't know.
No,
but
I think there is something kind of cool. You know what I think is cool about the suit is the chest plate, that, because it's on Arnold's crazy buff body, and then and then it adds all these ripples,
tubes and stuff. Yeah.
Right, but I just mean it's like everyone in this movie is in a like a bust that is cartoonishly muscled, including the most cartoonishly muscled person working in Hollywood.
Right.
But the giant piece with the pecs has this cool thing where it's like a clear chest plate, and then inside of it looks like it's like this translucent kind of moving blue icy goo. And I thought that was cool, because it kind of is like you don't ever see him bare chested, and so it kind of like begs the question of like what's actually going on under this suit. And I kind of liked picturing that under the suit he's like in Morton Joe in Fury Road, where in the that guy has a huge buff chiseled chest plate on, but in the beginning you see he's this weird sick old man, and they're putting this body armor for him to go play this like, you know, dictator demigod figure to the starving hordes. And I enjoyed thinking like, what if he's really like sick and kind of gaunt under there.
Right. And then I would imagine, that you had those questions answered when he's super buff, when he's in Arkham Asylum and can beat up his prison guards.
And in the flashbacks when he's in his when he's Arnold Schwarzenegger, the scientist.
Oh, yeah. You mean Schwarzenegger?
Right. It's just, I mean, look, people can be in shape and smart. It happens all the time. But the idea of like a scientist bodybuilder is so fucking...
No, decathlete. They make a point to say decathlete in the flashback or when they're examining him.
Yeah, we have to explain why the scientist is the buffest person alive.
I know. And as we all know, decathletes look like Bruce Jenner or Caitlyn Jenner. So it's funny that they made it that. But they mentioned twice that he's a 2-time decathlete champion when Batman and Robin are in the Batcave finding out about him. But I'm almost done here.
He works out a ton. This makes sense.
But I think his armor looks cool. It doesn't look cool in this movie, but there are a few moments where I could tell that a lot of work went into it. And of the suits, I would say worn in this movie, it looks the coolest. And if you want to look at photos on the internet of it on display, you can see how much work went into this thing. Schwarzenegger wore a bald cap, which I think is interesting because I think he actually does look like he's bald. Yeah.
They pulled it off.
Yeah. He declined to shave his head, and he wore blue LEDs in his mouth and had acrylic paint applied. That is another aspect, I think, where I'm not going to say it's well shot or it looks so memorable and cool, but yeah, I think in the moments where it's tied in on his face and he's wearing blue contacts and he's painted, is good application of hair and makeup. So good job there, guys.
Can I just comment? I got to comment about the bald of it all.
Oh, please, yeah, I'm sorry.
Which is Schwarzenegger looks good with a chrome dome. I was kind of like, this
Very
is
handsome.
this is a more appealing look to me than the crew cut that he's famous for.
Well, yeah, I think when he was still, and what's interesting about Arnold is that, we talk about how, I think of Terminator 2, the years after that, when he was in Jingle All the Way, Junior. Junior is actually the first appearance of Schwarzenegger. But, folks, Arnold was 37 years old in Terminator 1, which came out in 1984. So by the time T2 is coming out, he's 45 years old. And obviously, depending on how you eat and how you take care of your body, sure, you could still cut a very dashing figure at that age, but it's much harder to. You have to work much harder. And, it's just impressive to me that Arnold maintained such a cut physique even into this era, right? Arnold was never like Brad Pitt in Fight Club, but, he was in his 50s at this point is what I mean to say. And it's just impressive.
Yeah. I wouldn't have guessed that.
The LEDs he wore in his mouth leaked battery acid into his mouth a couple of different times. So they had to be wrapped in balloons to prohibit this from happening. His prosthetic.
So it's like a real life version of that moment on The Simpsons where McBain says, my eyes, the goggles do nothing.
Oh shit, I screwed it up. I love that moment. I love that moment in context or not. It's just so funny. But yeah, dude, it took 6 hours to apply this each day. And the extensive time that it consumed to get him ready to act in hair and makeup significantly restricted his shooting time. As like I said, his contract was limited to 12 work hours a day. And then last little bit, I don't mean to linger on the cast so long, but Uma Thurman, Demi Moore, Sharon Stone, and Julia Roberts were all considered for the role of Poison Ivy. Obviously, Uma Thurman got the part, but really interesting range of potential actors there. I think Julia Roberts is the one that makes the most sense, but they're all kind of similar, except Sharon Stone. God love her. She's a beautiful woman, a lot older than these other actors. And then the last on the Femme Fatales, Alicia Silverstone was the only choice for Batgirl. So that means somebody wrote this role for Alicia Silverstone, folks.
Yeah.
And prior to filming,
it. No one else could have done this truly meaty part.
Yeah. Well, and cut from the film too is the scene where she has dental surgery to explain why her bottom lip is drooping all the time. But that was also written into the film. But after I cover the kind of general background and the cast, you've taken us through the plot of each film. Are you comfortable doing that with this crazy thing today, Walker?
Yes. So you want me to tell you what this movie's about? To the best
Please.
Of my recollection and ability?
Me and the audience, yeah.
This is the first film in this franchise where I honestly have no earthly idea what the story of this one really is, but I will do my best. Now, you stated earlier that Alfred is the main character of this film. One of my early notes in this, when I was watching this movie, says, did Alfred need a subplot? And then moments later, I answered my own question and wrote, no. But as far as I can tell, the narrative thrust that this movie is really trying to create...
Try not to use such big words, please, when talking about this movie.
The story be that basically, this movie's called Batman and Robin, right? And to that end, this movie basically just is a complete retread of the narrative conflict between Batman and Robin in the last movie, right? In the last movie, it's about Bruce learning to trust Dick and treat him as a partner. And by the end of the movie, he has learned to trust Dick and treated him as a partner. Mm-hmm. They just completely wipe that all away. And the whole story between Batman and Robin is Robin whining, you don't treat me as a partner, and Batman saying, I can't treat you as a partner. So there's that.
Yeah.
In this one, the story with the villains, it seems to really, really have boiled it down to the essentials. I feel like for every one of these movies, I state that while I do think the tone of superhero movies, of Batman in particular, later on becomes oppressively dark and
Sure.
gritty with the Nolan verse, it does kind, I feel like there is a nice middle ground between those things, which is called comic books. If you read a Batman comic, it grounds you enough in the world that you can take it seriously and suspend your disbelief for the time that you're being told this story, if it's done well. I feel like the Tim Burton movies, while they do struggle at different points in different ways narratively, I do think that they have a nice tone in that it's like, yeah, we are going to treat this Batman world as the real world for the duration of this 2-hour movie.
Sure.
Because at a certain point, if it's not a comedy, if you don't take it a little bit seriously, why do I care? Why do I care if I'm just watching this poorly made thing where it seems like Joel Schumacher's approach to it is like, hey, Batman is stupid, so this movie is stupid.
Right.
All that to say, I don't really even know how to sum up the story in terms of Batman and his relationship to the villains. It's just a given that they hate Batman and are adversaries of his, right? In the other movies, there is some attention paid to how Batman has foiled their objectives in some way enough for them to have a vendetta against Batman. That is not here in this case. Victor Fries, as you said, is in a suit powered by diamonds, so he's stealing diamonds. And Poison Ivy's story is, I feel like it's a very, kind of in a very, these movies don't need to be messaging movies at all. But I also feel like, wow, what an innocent time, or a stupid time. Not even innocent. What a stupid time culturally that in 1997, we're still unconcerned enough with the degradation of this planet that it's just the fact that this woman cares about that is just a punchline. It's all it ever is in this movie. I don't feel
I don't agree with that. I think
the
scene where she's at I agree with it in large part, but there is one scene, and we're not going to necessarily go through beat by beat. So I think it's okay to highlight the scene now in the telescope unveiling. You know how every major city, Walker, you live in the Bay Area, I live in Sacramento, the capital. Those telescope unveilings, just like the tree lighting ceremony that we go to every other week.
It's an annual ceremony where we go, what is the telescope going? I mean, the Oakland Hills, there's
perfect example,
hundreds of telescopes up there at this point because we do this every year. And meanwhile, our roads are some of the worst roads in the country.
So at the telescope unveiling where she had Pamela Isley, we'll talk about her transformation later, but she is essentially Poison Ivy, but she's much like Edward Nygma when he has the box unveiling. He can kind of alternate between the two. So she's back as a scientist who was working in South America under Wayne Enterprises' former corporate sponsorship. And I do think that there's some attention given to the idea. Basically, she's making the Thanos argument, Gen Z listeners, that obviously any genocide is inexcusable, regardless how justifiable you may think the future of humanity may be. That's just not a route to go down. But in the Thanos case, I think that movie is really well written in that you do at a certain point go, okay, well, what is my counter argument? Not necessarily from a moral ground, but from the logical argument that he's making. He's not saying kill all of this race of people. He's saying kill half of every person in existence. And I feel like in a less sophisticated way, she's making that argument of the degradation of the planet is so bad. And in order for our human species to survive, take a step back and look at us as an animal. There has to be some sort of decision-making made. Again, I don't empathize with those arguments, but that is the one time where she makes some sort of logical sense. The movie is so bad that it's hard to put it in that context, but I don't think that she's only meant to be ridiculous because she holds that. But I could be wrong. I mean, I think that you could look at it either way.
I know. I do think that is in there, but I think that because they make her position so ridiculous that it's like, I don't know. Yeah. I feel that because they don't ever give her her agenda is so extreme from the get-go. Before she even becomes Poison Ivy, she loves plants more than she loves people. Yeah. And so I feel like her being the stand-in for this environmental movement that was well established at the time, even though climate change was not the conventional wisdom that it is now and was not talked about in mainstream terms as the existential crisis that it is now, even though in the span of a planet's lifetime from now until 1997 is nothing. But in terms of culture, things change a lot, right?
Yeah.
So the fact that it's like that we don't ever see her like make a point that has more validity than that just made me feel like this movie is really holding her up as an object of buffoonery and kind of derision.
Dude, and to that, I think that's so well said. And to that point too, again, my cultural awareness of climate change is shaped by the fact that I am now in my 30s. So naturally, I'm going to think, oh, well, it's more relevant and more in the zeitgeist than it's ever been. It is. I mean, environmentalism in America was really popularized by, we would say Native American now, but it was called the Crying Indian commercial, Iron Eyes Cody, when the person throws the litter at his feet. And that was in 1973, I want to say. So it's, not that folks weren't passionate about the environment and the degradation of it. We had people writing about it in America during the Industrial Revolution, right? But our understanding of it really came into, like Walker was saying, I think, in the public zeitgeist in America, I would say in the 1970s, you mentioned Mad Men earlier, people would literally litter willy-nilly. So at least littering. But I think all that to say, I think that from a Joel Schumacher perspective, who was born, I want to say in the 1940s, he's since passed away, you can really see that he sees environmentally passionate people as like Greenpeace that would attack a ship that is doing dolphin hunting, which by the way, I think is kind of badass. But as like these crazy sort of 12 Monkeys agenda-driven people like a Pamela Isley, who is off her rocker and only insane, and Bruce shuts her down by saying the planet would starve to death and like blah, blah, blah in that scene that I was just referencing where she looks like a psychopath for even being environmentally passionate. So yes. I agree with you.
And if you compare it to like the agenda of Mr. Freeze, it's like, okay, so Poison Ivy's agenda is that she wants to kill a huge amount of the global human population in order for plants, which she loves more than people, to be able to proliferate. Mr. Freeze wants to save his wife.
And freeze everything. And she somehow thinks they'd be a good team. It's like, hello, Frost.
So let's get back to the story, because this is, again, all I'm keen in on is that I am completely baffled as to how the agendas of these two villains intersect, except that they both hate Batman. I am also none the wiser to why that is, except I guess if we want to do crimes and Batman is going to impede that in some way. It does become a plot point, not a plot point. It does become casually referenced late in the movie that apparently Poison Ivy is also romantically infatuated with Mr. Freeze.
Well, Walker, we all know that women use their sexuality to twist and manipulate us. That's all that they do.
Right. But the movie gets very feminist later, where one of the women says, "You're a bitch for doing that." So this movie is so hateful to women. It is and the last one, we talked a lot about how the last one does not do womankind any favors in its representation.
This one is markedly worse, I would say.
This one feels like Akiva and Schumacher's like fucking like incel manifesto or something.
Oh my gosh, but Schumacher, not an incel. Schumacher, a very proud and out gay man. Yeah, and I just want to say this is not my territory. We may end up cutting this, but kind of in the same way that James Cameron pioneered, I think it's known as like first wave feminism or whatever. And by the way, he didn't pioneer it; women did. But I'm just saying the way he did on screen, having a character like Ripley
manifested it on screen.
Absolutely, and did it in such a great way. And this is a route to go of making your character so awesome that you don't really think about as the viewer, oh, this is a woman. But you do with Ripley because she has the maternal instinct. It's so smartly written. I love it. It highlights her femininity, which is a beautiful, awesome fucking thing, and her badassery, as most women in our life tend to do, right? They don't have to do both of the things that I'm saying, but like it's so smartly written. But James Cameron has since, being an older person now, criticized like Wonder Woman, for instance, for being like, why does she, why does it highlight her? Exactly. And to me, that's a little bit of a dated perspective in my mind, right? But I think in the same way, I say that as an example because Schumacher, being a gay person in America or in the world, was no small order in the time that he grew up in the 1960s, right?
Right.
But I think in the same way as Cameron has since gone on record to sort of date things, these movies are so much that way. I'm like, it paints gay, even though it's not a gay movie, but the homoeroticism is so in your face and so ridiculous, where I'm like, I know gay people and they're not all this ridiculous. It's so offensive. If I were a gay person, again, we can cut that. I don't have a problem saying it, though. I think this movie is so offensive to women and gay people.
It's offensive to all people.
Anyways, sorry. Please go ahead.
No, I mean, yeah, exactly. It's just the fact that you find out 3/4 of the way through this movie that Poison Ivy is infatuated. The way you find out that she is sexually infatuated with Mr. Freeze is that she kills his cryogenically frozen wife because, I believe as she puts it, this is a one-woman show. And I was like, she's into Mr. Freeze? And it made me realize this movie thinks that's just a given, that all these female characters, the only objective they could possibly have is to get with these men. And then later, yeah, like you said, Batgirl kicks Uma Thurman's ass and is like, oh, you're one of those women who uses your sexuality to get what you want. And it's like, oh, right. And it's like, being sexual is bad. It's just, and you can tell that the movie at that point is like, check out the awesome girl power that we're doing.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, I totally agree. I think it is always a curveball, this film, because I will just say on record, listeners, I've seen this film at least 20 times. It always to this day is, 20 times, not 100 times like Batman 1989. That's 1/5.
No, but talk about why have you gone back? Like, did at one point, did you like this movie, or did you always dislike it but keep going back to see if it was actually that bad, or what do you hate watch it? What's the 20 is a lot. I've seen it 3.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say I've gone back as a kid and as a teenager to see if it was truly this bad. And usually when I start the Batman franchise from the 1990 or 1989 onward, I will just end up going in sequence. You just want to see the whole thing. Yeah. Yeah, but all I was going to say, though, about oh, darn, I can't remember what I was going to say. So it's okay. But
well, we were talking about the horrifically tone deaf attempts at girl power in this movie.
Oh, yeah. I was going to say, though, everything that catches, or the thing that always consistently catches me by surprise, and I forget, is that Poison Ivy does seemingly see herself as being romantic with Mr. Freeze, because it just comes out of fucking nowhere. The team up is so ham-fisted and laughable, but there's at least a moment where they have that conversation and they see that we could work together for some reason. So it at least attempts to do that. But yeah, there's no indicator that she wants to be romantically involved with him until she outright states it, which is really a consistent flaw and theme of this movie, is characters just outright stating because they think the audience can't figure anything out without a narrative dialogue. But again, unless you're done with the plot, I'd like you to keep going before I kind of go into my general thoughts.
I'm glad that me attempting to describe the story of this movie is generating conversation, because again, I can barely put a coherent summation of what this movie is together.
But we're 3/4 of the way through it when you talk
there is two other key components to this movie, which is Alfred is dying of McGregor's syndrome or disease. Zach is making a really good Alfred face right now.
Yeah, it's the face of Alfred coming, which is the face he makes to indicate every time it looks like he's just blowing a load standing up.
Do you think that when Alfred ejaculates, he goes, "It's fishy swell, sir"?
It's supposed to be.
It's supposed to be warm. Ew! I'm so grossed out.
So Alfred is sick with McGregor syndrome.
Jizz, sir. It's supposed to be in your throat. Okay, so Alfred is passing away of McGregor disease stage 1, which in this world, I guess stage 1 is the worst, right? Because in in medical terms, it's stage 4
3
is the worst, right?
Yeah, stage 4, there is no stage 5. So yeah, you're terminal at stage 4.
Right. But
as Johnny Sack says, there is no stage 5.
A doctor comes in and goes, it's stage 1 of McGregor's disease. All you can do is make him comfortable. What the fuck is stage 4?
Well, there is.
Why is there even stages if there's only stage 1 is terminal?
I know.
So Alfred
completely agree with you.
Alfred is having his own mini movie within this one where he's dying in another room, and as he's dying, he is carrying out
sweating a lot.
Sweating and carrying out some sort of incomprehensible subplot where he's trying to track down his long lost brother,
Wilfred.
Is his name really Wilfred?
Mm-hmm.
Who's also a butler, and I will talk about what it results in because I don't understand what's going on here, except that apparently butlering is a family trade in the Pennyworth line. But this gets us into the other big part of this movie, which is his niece, Barbara, shows up to visit him inexplicably dressed as a Catholic schoolgirl. And she is the Batgirl of this movie. And the movie is about Batman learning to treat Dick Grayson as a partner and Batgirl joining the ranks and him fighting Poison Ivy, Mr. Freeze, and Bane, who we haven't even really talked about. But honestly, I'm talking about it in such broad strokes because nothing else about the story mechanics make any sense to me. Do you have anything to add?
No, I mean, I really don't, except for that Barbara Pennyworth, you mentioned that apparently butlering is a family tradition, much like indentured servitude, and so forth. But one of Barbara's goals that she mentions that has no follow-up or resolution is to break the family tradition of Alfred being a butler. And her and Dick Grayson have a very weird conversation about whether or not Alfred is happy. And it's like, I'm sorry. I mean, every life matters. And I know the elderly are an oft-looked just societal group that we don't treat with enough respect. But Alfred is 955 years old. His life and shots at being happy or doing something different are over. I don't give a fuck if he was happy or not. I mean, it's such a weird plot point that she is passionate about, like, breaking him out. And
well, it's also weird. I thought that scene was
there
very
is
weird
no
too,
resolve
because
if he's happy or not.
Well, it is very strange because Alfred does seem to be genuinely fulfilled by his life of working for the Waynes, and he seems to find a real nobility in it. But also, look, I am all for like class consciousness getting injected into any movie and discussing about like the conditions of working people. But Alfred is pretty low on the list of workers that we need to liberate, as far as I'm concerned. Like, it's not indentured servitude. My assumption is that he is highly paid for what he does, which, as far as I can tell, is,
very little.
Kind of Batman's gopher, and then, once a year he lets an unauthorized person into the Batcave, and then he calls it a day. Collects his 401k. Collects his what am I trying
401k?
to say? 401k and health benefits. Although, does he have health benefits? Is that why he's dying of McGregor's disease?
I think he does, because you'll notice we are at the kind of
the doctor did do a house call. That's what
I was just going to say. And in today's day and age, if a doctor's doing a house call, you have that doctor on retainer. So I think he gets to partake in the benefits. And I don't mean to rush you, but since we're talking about Alfred's McGregor syndrome and his subsequent healing, can you take us through just like the very last little bit of the movie?
Alfred. Oh, yes. Okay, Zach, because I'm going to be honest. Last 15 minutes of this movie, I was looking at my phone a lot. Okay. I'm gonna just say that. So if I missed something here, you let me know. But
editing your notes, of course.
The notes also drop off at this time. At the end of this movie, when So Poison Ivy, there's no redemption for her. She's a dirty woman. So she is carted off to Arkham. But there is like a real like Luke Skywalker, Darth Vader, there is still good in you moment between Mr. Freeze and Batman, where Batman is like basically like, hey, you want to save your wife from McGregor's disease?
She has stage 3.
Okay.
They say that his wife has stage 3, which is why she can't be healed yet.
At stage 1, all you can do is make them comfortable. At stage 2, all you can do is cryogenically freeze them. So I wonder, or at stage 3, you have to cryogenically freeze them. I wonder. At stage 2, it's like, I don't like cash their social security checks and have a good time, I guess. I don't know. But so basically Batman is like, hey, you know, we can, like what I said, like, I know that you were this brilliant doctor. That's still in there. You need to save your wife. I need to save this 90-year-old man who I won't let just peacefully go into the night because I need him to like bring me sandwiches at 3 a.m. Can we work together here? At this point, Dr. Freeze reveals the cure for McGregor's disease.
Stage 1.
From his maybe stage 2 is weirdly the only terminal phase is in the middle. It's like stage 1, just get comfortable. Stage 3, freeze your ass and wait for a cure. Stage 2, you're dead. If you don't make it through stage 2.
But it's the bad Lou Gehrig's disease at stage 2.
I thought it was the good Hodgkin's. Remember that? Yeah, there is no good Hodgkin's. Yeah. There's just Hodgkin's. But Mr. Freeze pulls this cure out of this like armor plate in his suit. Zach, and then the next we see Batman puts it in an IV drip for Alfred.
That happened to be modified to accommodate a glow stick tube, which I thought was really funny.
Which is kind of a return of the glow sticks from Batman. For like, makes you wonder about Joel Schumacher's nightlife that he has glow sticks on the brain. This heavily.
I have no questions about it, but yeah.
But so. Did I miss something, or did Mr. Freeze's weird ass literally have the cure this whole time? Why was he doing this?
Well, because I think that they sneak in at a couple different moments that he would need to amp up his research through more diamonds and more like freezing of the city to somehow achieve healing his wife, who is cryogenically frozen but is not fully dead, which I also don't understand. But I think that he had gotten so far in his research through like stealing diamonds and stuff to where he could, because Alfred is about to die. He's not dead yet, even though, yes, the doctor contradicts that by saying all you can do is make him comfortable. So I think he had gotten far enough along in his research to where if somebody was in Alfred's stage where they're just sweating a lot and looking really nervous, then like that's how far he had come. But yeah, at the stage where his wife needed to be cryogenically frozen, he had not developed a cure. And I just want to say too, when he hands over the cure to Batman, this is how little thought goes into the logic of each and every moment. He pulls it out of his like Predator arm switch that he has, right? And then he hands Batman 2 tubes of the cure. And then in the next scene, we see only 1 tube is required. So why not have him just have had 1 tube? Why?
I think the other tube was for his wife.
But he hands them both in case Alfred gets it again.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, there's a real relapse rate with McGregor's.
But yeah, I mean, would you call that the end of the film though? After he gives it, all the super friends hug. I think there's one more shot at Arkham,
and then it shows it. Yes, and then it shows them running. The 3 of them running behind the in front of the bat signal. And Bruce has none of the misgivings about adding a 3rd member to the team that he did about adding a 2nd member. And
well, there's one critical scene though that I want to highlight. That is, I think the last scene of the movie before they're running in frame against the bat signal and George Clooney's bat ears are wiggling. But prior to that ending moment, it goes back to Arkham Asylum. Now, you had said that Poison Ivy unceremoniously dies, and I would agree with that. by the way, folks, the moment that she dies, the scene starts with her in a Venus flytrap opening and obeying her, and yet the scene of her death ends with her being eaten by the same Venus flytrap that suddenly is hungry for her. So she no longer has control for some reason. But then I thought she died. Again, this is another moment I always forget. There is a last little bit in Arkham where they have essentially put them as cellmates together, and because it is revealed to Mr. Freeze by Batman that Pamela Isley / Poison Ivy killed Mr. Freeze's wife out of jealousy. He finds that out, which is kind of the bargaining chip that Batman uses to get the cure for McGregor syndrome. So he's now mad at Poison Ivy and heartbroken, and she's in Arkham Asylum. They put them in a cell together, and I got total prison rape vibes because he says, "I'm going to make your life a living hell." And I'm like, okay, well, how's he going to do that if he's not going to kill her? It was really uncomfortable for me.
I thought it was really weird too, that it's
really
not that he's there to kill her. He's there to like somehow torment her for the rest of her time.
And where does your mind go? This giant 6'4" dude is threatening a skinny woman in prison. I'm like, this cannot be good. And they should have rethought this scene.
Honestly, dude, I was like, oh, they Jeffrey Epsteined her. It's like, oh, that looks like she killed herself, even though we had this hitman in the same cell with her. It was like, we should make shirts that are like Poison Ivy didn't kill herself.
Yeah, just a baffling conclusion to the film. I have some notes, but I still would love to kick it over to you if you have anything else.
Well, let's just drill down on McGregor's for a second here while we're talking about it. You talked about how the main symptom is sweatiness,
and ejaculation.
Which it does.
Alfred looks like he's ejaculating, folks. I swear to God.
So, okay, you're saying that his sick face is an O face.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Now, and you also talked about this very bizarre scene where they like try to briefly ask the question of like, how is Alfred treated as an employee? That scene, even though I do agree with you, or maybe it was even I who said it, that I don't think that Alfred is necessarily like at the rung of the working class that most workers like. I'm not putting Alfred in with like the unionization effort for butlers to billionaires. To me is not as pressing as it is for maybe like, you know, Amazon fulfillment center workers.
The hierarchy for me goes like the folks that took their own life jumping off of the building in China where Apple iPhones are manufactured, then Alfred.
Yeah, he's the second most.
Then most Amazon fulfillment workers.
And then all the children
Diamond
who make our clothes. Yeah, exactly. But first we gotta, I mean, hey, if we can't help our own butlers, how are we gonna help the children in the diamond mines? But okay, so even though I'm not like particularly concerned about Alfred's working conditions, I did think that conversation was interesting because it did get into the very uncomfortable justifications that have been used to justify slavery and then servitude and are used to justify low wage jobs now.
They're happy,
right? It's like
there's no resolve to that counterpoint.
No, she's like, I don't think he's happy, or she's like, is he family? He's your servant or whatever. And he goes,
makes your food, cleans up your
Alfred's
dishes.
happy. And she's kind of like, oh, okay. And that's the exact same bullshit they say now, that it's like Target isn't a place that you come to get paid minimum wage so you can afford to feed your kids. It's a family. You're a team member. So that did crack me up. And then there's another conversation about Alfred because she's trying to tell him, you think Alfred's happy, but he's actually sick and he's too proud to show you, right? There's a follow-up scene where Dick Grayson is talking to Bruce Wayne and he's like, Barbara thinks Alfred's sick. And
this is the very next scene, Walker.
And George Clooney goes, Alfred's not sick. He's dying. Okay, well then he is sick. He's not dying of a car accident. He's not dying of murder. He's dying of McGregor syndrome. So you're being
too proud to tell you,
splitting hair with me. Splitting hairs with me about this.
And George Clooney has the smuggest grin when he delivers this news to Dick.
I mean, he has that on his face the whole time. Also, George Clooney enters multiple scenes kind of toweling himself off as if he just got done working out, which makes sense.
He has any moisture on his face or body at all.
Did you notice that?
He's often dry.
He's often in a robe or like a gym towel. Like, and it did make me think how funny it would be. I was kind of like, this reminds me the most of his character in Burn After Reading as it does in anything else, where that character, so if you haven't seen it, his character's like a serial cheating, like sex addict, basically. And every scene either begins or ends with him being like, I think I'm going to get a run in, going on like a super long jog. And so whenever Batman comes in toweling himself off, I kind of pictured that he either just had like promiscuous sex or ran 5 miles. Yeah. But then Alfred and Batman have a scene together where George Clooney's like, I know you're sick. And Alfred says, and I wrote this down, a gentleman does not discuss his ailments. It is not civilized. And I was like, damn, that actually does break my heart and does make me think that maybe Barbara like has a whole, like, is Alfred okay? Like, do we need like some sort of, regulatory oversight on that?
Yeah. For butlers to an openness for butlers to kind of report, not just like self-care. More of an open environment for butlers, like an HR department.
The same way there's a movement now for like, mental health to be addressed among like young men, it's like we're deconstructing this idea of masculinity being something where you don't talk about your feelings. Does butlering have to be something where you don't discuss your ailments?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I don't know a lot of people that have butlers though, so I don't know how to help them unionize, But
that's true. Maybe this podcast should get a butler, and we could start there. And then people will be like, "Do they pay this guy?" And we'll be like, "He's happy."
No, we're an equal opportunity employee. They are happy. We could say
yes, and to them, payment is getting to hear us discuss radio.
Absolutely.
That was just all I wanted to talk about the Alfred of it all. But what are some key scenes for you that you want to make sure we drill down on?
So Walker, I love that you honed in so much on the Alfred of it all. The main character. At least it should have been called Batman, Robin, and Alfred. I think. In fairness, maybe he's not the main character, but he should.
And Alfred, and his niece Batgirl too.
Bruce, it's me, Barbara. My general thoughts that I would just like to say is Batman and Robin is a very interesting experiment in trying to understand what makes a movie good or bad by conventional standards. And I want to cite my source on this.
Because we should say this is a panned movie.
Yes, this is a pan movie. It is so much. It is just so bad. I said by conventional standards because obviously all art is subjective. But I would say this falls under kind of the unifying banner of what people tend to consider a poor filmmaking. And I remember Paul Rust in a podcast I know that we're both huge fans of that you turned me on to with Gorley and Rust. He talked about he's somebody who's actually been to film school, and he talked about when he was in college, that as a freshman or sophomore, when you really feel like, this is his words, not mine, I'm paraphrasing, but you feel like your appreciation and depth of understanding of film is really increasing in the dry section of the year, which is usually thought to be like January and February. On a Monday they came back to school, and so sitting down for class, one of the professors said, "What did you all go out and see this weekend at the movies?" And it was, a month where it was like only rom-coms, and nothing good. And they all went like, nothing, there's nothing good. And he's like, you guys should be going to the movies every single weekend day that you can. There's a dollar theater down the street. You're film students. You cannot tell me that you understand what is bad and good at this point. And if you do, you need to be out there seeing movies to find out what the small minor difference is between something that is quote unquote good and bad is. And you could see that it's really just a couple of minor differences. And again, I'm paraphrasing. I'm not saying this is an exact quote, but this is a story that Paul Rust told. And if he ever has the pleasure of listening to this show, I know he wouldn't mind, because that is like the kind of guy he is. He has such humility, and he's somebody who I would say understands writing so well. So with that being said, I just want to say that I think Batman and Robin is a prime example of these small little differences making something so much marketably worse than the previous. I would say, I'm talking about the first two films, by the way, which we acknowledge have their problems, but are universally better, right? And you could say, oh, well, the acting's better in those films. That's true, but the ensemble of this movie, of the cast, it might be dated in 2023 terms, and I mean by that, only one of the main cast members, being George Clooney, has sustained a career like with longevity.
He's the only person who remains on the A list out of everyone.
Yeah, Arnold Schwarzenegger sort of aged out of the type of roles he would take. He's obviously had a very successful career. But Chris O'Donnell, I think, is like on one of the CSI shows. Uma Thurman, call it Hollywood sexism. I actually do think it is that in her case. She's not really getting great work anymore. But she is a very talented actress who's done some amazing work,
Before and after this movie.
Yeah, absolutely, before and after. And not just in the Quentin Tarantino films. A lot of folks don't know this movie, but the Les Miserables, the non-musical version, she plays Cosette's mother. I can't remember the character's name. I think she's phenomenal in that movie, and that is the same year as this movie. So she's a talented. The cast is good, is what I'm trying to say. But the cast was maybe better in Batman Returns, for instance, or Batman. Have Jack Nicholson, Michael Keaton, Michelle Pfeiffer. We talked a lot about. But yeah, I just think that there was more than enough money to fund this project, more money than there had been for any of the previous films. You have a special effects budget, you have a great cast and crew. Director Joel Schumacher, I would say, has never been a great director at all, but he knows what he's doing. He knew what he was doing, I would say. I've seen his other films. There's not the Dutch tilts. The movie I asked you if you'd seen is A Time to Kill. That is it's dated, and I'm sure if I was a person of color, I would see this even clearer, but it's a dated commentary on racial injustice in America. And what I mean by that, listeners, is it's Matthew McConaughey as a white savior. But it's a phenomenal Samuel L. Jackson performance. It's a good Matthew McConaughey performance. Sandra Bullock's good in it. I'm not recommending it on the merits of what it has to say about race. It's a good movie. It's decently shot. So I'm saying that he's competent. He seems incompetent with what he does with camera operation, set, all that. And I understand those are other teams of people, but it's all under the banner of the number one.
He's in charge of it all.
No, yeah. And I mean, so
everything looks like shit. You're responsible for how the movie looks as the director.
Yes. And the writer, I mentioned Akiva Goldsman, A Beautiful Mind Might Be Dated. He knows how to write a screenplay. So I'm just trying to say again, to tie it all together, that Batman and Robin it's not that it's that different from any of the other Batman films made before and after. And I want to say more on that later, but it's these small details that the devil resides in that make this movie such a baffling mess. And I want to focus on the opening scene to highlight that, but I really would love to hear your thoughts on anything I just said.
Okay, let's talk about the opening scene, because I have something. Because I think you're asking a really interesting question, and I think it could be very interestingly explored. There's something in this movie that to me is exactly like something in Batman Returns, and why does one work and one doesn't? You might be thinking of the exact same thing. So, but
perhaps
why don't you go ahead?
So like I said, listeners, we're not going to go through scene by scene, but I have a few chosen out, and I'm sure Walker does too. So the opening of the film, and in my notes here in the heading, I have repetition, and more repetition. Now, this movie doesn't seek to do the same thing as the previous films only. It actually does the opposite in a few other ways, but I want to highlight in this opening scene. So instead of the Batman getting ready to kick some ass montage that previously only showed Batman's ass in Batman Forever, we are now treated to an ass and codpiece shot. Why? Who is this for?
And two butt shots.
Two butt shots.
He doubles down on the butt shot.
Right. So we're repeating, but we're making it bigger, right? In Batman Forever, Alfred and Batman engage in a back and forth that was clearly a commercial for any fast food chain willing to sponsor the movie when Batman says, "I'll get drive-through." This time, we have Alfred referencing pizza we've never seen Batman eat, followed by a weird warning to bring the Batmobile back in one piece, even though it was the fucking Riddler who had previously destroyed the Batmobile. So it's like, okay, you're referencing a movie, but you're telling Batman not to be a naughty boy and crash it, when it's like, if you think for 2 seconds, it was never Batman's fault. So we just have quips that like command you not to think. They that's the number one thing they ask is don't think about it. And then finally, Robin repeats his joke from the previous film about chicks digging the car. He doubles down on it again in the beginning of this movie. So like, this is how low ranking the thought put into these scenes are, is don't break the car. Well, he didn't. and then, hey, remember this one joke that may or may not have worked? Well, we're going to double down on that. It's just so stupid. Anyways, any thoughts on the opening scene that I just talked about?
I agree with you. It boils down a bunch of stuff that was the stuff that didn't work about the first one into we're going to do it again, and any charisma that this first by the first one I mean the first Schumacher.
Yeah.
Any charisma, and I went pretty hard on Batman Forever, but it's like any charm that movie had is completely gone in this one.
Absolutely. And this is where, I mentioned Paul Russ, where like the way he talks about good and bad movies is really inspiring to me. And this is where I started to try and think about it from, that perspective. So there's some stark differences in the introduction of the villains in this film. So the first three Batman films, talking Batman 1989 up through Batman Forever, do a very nice job, or at least make an attempt of showing how the villains are formed by a series of events Batman is either directly responsible for, and what I'm talking about there would be Joker, Two-Face, and the Riddler. So Batman or Bruce Wayne are directly responsible for that individual becoming a villain in those three cases, or he's totally disconnected from, which would be Penguin and Catwoman. Right? Their evolution into villains and being a societal reject is not because of Batman. They're their own events. So in all three films, the story then unfolds around Batman coming to terms with the villain and getting to know them, right? So in the case of Batman 1989, the Joker, Batman drops him into a vat of chemicals, but we know that Joker previously, Jack Napier previously murdered the Wayne family, Batman's parents, Bruce Wayne's parents, and this eventually leads to a showdown with tons of momentum and buildup. Now, we can, of course, apply context and talk about that. Even in our episode, we talked about it's funny that the villains have this conflict that doesn't really occur till halfway through the movie. By the time you're on that church building, that church tower, you want Batman and Joker to kick each other's ass or to fight and address it. It's really well done. Opinion, of course. Penguin and Catwoman. Batman, Bruce Wayne has zero involvement in what made them into villains, and the story at least attempts to bring the characters into one another's lives and consciousness such that there's a reason for them to be in conflict. I think it's even a little bit worse done in Batman Returns, but to anchor that story, you have Catwoman and Batman having such amazing chemistry, and Selena Kyle and Bruce Wayne. So there's such great things working in favor of kind of a haphazard script. And then finally, Two-Face and Riddler, Bruce Wayne / Batman both have a history with Harvey Dent / Toothface, and then Edward Nygma has a history with Bruce Wayne and eventually Batman. So even though that movie is much poorer than the first two, the way they have the villains intertwine with the main character is like logical at the very least, right? In this, you have Batman and Robin. In Batman and Robin, you have Mr. Freeze introduced to, and you talked about this again, so I don't mean to retread too much, but you have him introduced by Commissioner Gordon as, hey, here's your new villain, to the extent where they come in to stop him. And he goes, hi, Freeze, I'm Batman, which I know people laugh at that line a lot. But here's why it bugs me so bad. Batman, world's greatest detective. In the first three movies, we have these great little montages, and they're little, of him doing his homework, finding out. So he doesn't have to introduce.
What's going on?
Exactly. Who is this woman? Who's this cat?
Is this something I need to deal with?
Yes. And if the villain and the hero have no personal history and no reason not to indiscriminately kill each other, why then do we make every attempt to only inconvenience one another? And what I'm speaking to is, in a good way, Two-Face wants to torture or toy with Batman because he's personally angry with him for like what he perceives to be what Batman may have caused by not stopping him from getting burned by the acid. Catwoman wants to toy with Batman due to their sexual tension and great competition with one another and the gender inequality that she thinks is present on her side. And she's right. And so Mr. Freeze is doing the same thing as what I described, like with Two-Face or maybe Joker to an extent, in that he has so many opportunities to kill them in their very first conflict, but he shoots the dinosaur in ice instead of killing them. And I get that this is a movie. I was just talking about this with a friend the other day of like, when I pick apart The Mandalorian, it's never from, which is a show I like, right? But it's never from, that would never happen. Well, of course it would never happen. And it's just annoying people try to do that. But when there's certain beats that they miss of a show that I think has set a certain level of quality, it's okay to pick up on the logical fallacies or inconsistencies because people notice that subconsciously too, right? And I think this movie is full of that. Like, why wouldn't Mr. Freeze just shoot them since he has no personal history or connection to Batman? It makes no sense. And I think those are the things that we pick up on of course the visuals, of course the costuming, of course the lines. But when the structure is that flawed from the beginning,
yes,
I think people pick up on that. And I know
yes.
I just went hard there in the paint. So I would like to hear your thoughts on that.
No, not at all. I love what you're saying. I agree with you. I don't think that I think that film, not just film, audiences, humans have an intuitive understanding of kind of how story is supposed to go based off of spending their whole lives watching movies and TV and reading books and things. And people can be unconventional with it. People can blow those things apart.
Psycho.
But yeah, you have to know why you're doing it and how you like it requires a deft touch. And it also is probably your Batman movie is probably not the place for it. Like, and you can tell every story under the sun while still having things touch these beats in a satisfying way for the most part. And we know when it's not happening.
We know people pick up on it. And so again, where I was sort of like trying to underscore that is in the first scene where Batman and Robin and Mr. Freeze face off. There's no point in going beat by beat. Watch the movie if you want a good laugh. But I think this is actually, I just want to quickly say that some of the special effects where I think they everything looks dated in this movie, but I do like when Mr. Freeze shoots his ice gun. I think that is one of the better looking special effects. But ultimately, what I really see in this scene visually is a huge amount of spending on stuff that looks so ridiculous, right? So you could spend all the money in the world. It doesn't make for a better looking film. And then the next scene. So I underscore what I think the fundamental writing problems are in like the story perspective, right? But just to hone in on some bad dialogue. After their first confrontation with Mr. Freeze, Batman and Robin are deconstructing the fight. And it's quickly determined that the Wayne family diamonds are needed to trap the snowman, is what Robin says. We're going to trap ourselves a snowman? And Batman, I love this part so much. Batman demands that Robin spends 10 hours in the simulator so he can fight better the next time. And I was just thinking, like, this is one of those beats that there's no other response besides laughing, because it's like, that's a weird starting point. Like, why not be like, I don't know. Because it's like, Bruce, you force someone to do anything for 10 hours, you're not going to get a good result. And you should know that. Like, say 2 hours, and if he spends 10 hours, then you know he's committed. But like, it's just such an odd line read. And then I talked about that Alfred always looks like he's having an orgasm when it indicates that he's suffering from McGregor's. There's a lot of that going on. It's like, it seems like he's just enjoying watching the boys argue so much. You cannot help but get weird sexual overtones out of this movie. So he does that. And then Alfred and Bruce are deconstructing the argument that we just saw between Robin and Bat. This movie is like, who wrote this movie? Because we see the argument, and then Alfred and Bruce are talking about it in the very next scene. And Alfred has the strangest line I've ever heard. He says, Master Dick follows the same star as you. He just gets there by his own course. And I mean, the sexual tension is so nuts in that scene. But yeah, it's just so crazy to me.
There's a lot of weird star stuff in this movie, too, because there's also a part where Bruce Wayne says, my father once told me to succeed, we need to pick a star and follow it. And it's like, yeah, and have billions of dollars of generational wealth. Asshole. No, Zach, it's interesting to me, though, this difference between bad and good, because did you catch? Because this movie's pretty subtle. I thought it was really interesting because Poison Ivy's origin is like a 1-to-1, like Catwoman's origin in Batman Returns. Now, we talked about in Batman Returns that all four of these movies have a pretty essentialized view of women. They, even though they are not 100% written by male screenwriters, there is a female screenwriter, at least in Batman Forever. And I don't know if there were in either of the first two movies. I don't think so. Were there?
No, not at all. Sam Hamill
and
you know,
and that being a aspect of the movies that are a little bit dated is the female characters are in very, very diminished roles, and sexuality is often used as a weapon and never, one facet of a whole person, right? So all that stands. I say all that to say, to even give Batman Returns a little knock, in this movie, you have Selena Kyle, played by Michelle Pfeiffer, who experiences the following transformation. She is demure, put upon, and unempowered. She is murdered by her evil boss and is licked by a bunch of cats and comes out highly sexualized, empowered, and in control of the situation as Catwoman, right? That is not necessarily a very deep or nuanced character evolution. But even with the criticisms that I think we fairly gave it, and that maybe somebody other than us would give it more, right? It may, like we still are two men watching this who grew up on it. It's not, it's we're being critical of it, but maybe from a more generous view than somebody else would.
Can I just interject? I would say that, like, yeah, if I were to summarize it, and I'm not saying you didn't, but it's that the problematic element is that her rebirth, re-evolution of her sexual awakening is synonymous with her also going crazy, right? Where it's like, hey, women aren't crazy that are like sexually empowered and in charge. But I think Michelle Pfeiffer, and I know you're going to take over this, but like Michelle Pfeiffer is so amazing in terms of her performance that she elevates it above that to where it does have a long-lasting impact, would be my summary of it.
Yes, I agree with all that. And I think this is very well covered in our Batman episode. I'm even less highlighting the problematic elements of it, although I did want to point them out, to say that it also just doesn't make a great deal of sense. There is no reason that her transformation as a Catwoman, it doesn't make sense in the literal way that she's licked by a bunch of cats and then kind of like retains the...
I've thought of this.
Properties
Cats are the guardians of the underworld. I think that's the what it's driving at, which is so stupid because there's no magic mythology in Batman. It's supposed to be real, big air quotes. But I've since thought of that since we've done that episode, that I'm like, I wonder if the idea they're driving at is that cats are the guardians of the underworld, so they resurrect her, but in doing so, they've like passed their spirit onto her.
Yes.
I never got that.
That's very... I said yes, like I knew that. That's a very interesting point. You are helping highlight what the point I am trying to make, which is that logical fallacies aside, dated portrayals aside, this thing happens in Batman Returns, and it more or less works. You buy it for the time that you need to buy it to enjoy Batman Returns. In Batman and Robin, Poison Ivy is demure and unempowered. This all happens in one scene in this movie, by the way. This happens over the course of, maybe 20 or 30 minutes in Batman Returns. It's literally her introduction and transformation are in the same scene in Batman and Robin. But in effect, she starts out unempowered, not in a position of controlling her own destiny, is murdered by her evil boss, is touched by a bunch of... looks like Max Schreck, is touched by a bunch of plants in much the same way that Catwoman is touched by a bunch of cats, and emerges a evil and quote-unquote empowered sexpot villainess. Why does this completely fail in Batman and Robin and more or less work, or at least is effective in Batman Returns? I will pass it over to you. I would say I think a key difference here is that even though the view of the female character in Batman Returns is somewhat essentialized, in this, she is crazy and then sexy. She I think that this movie does hold Poison Ivy in total contempt because you see her dirty, messy hair wandering around talking about how like plants are the real people, and then she's murdered and her only thing is that she's now sexual. But why do you think it also doesn't work in this?
Well, I think it just speaks to...
because you empathized with Selena Kyle before her transformation, but I don't think you have any empathy for...
You don't have the chance to, because, she looks like a a Soviet era scientist in like her garb. And not that we don't empathize with Soviets, I just mean that you have no way in. It's the most poorly lit scene of the entire movie, in a movie that is always badly lit. But yeah, you just see that she has like, she's in the same way you mentioned that they're trying to 1-for-1 model it and they do such a poor job. But in the same way that, Michelle Pfeiffer, even when she's not hot yet, she's still one of the most gorgeous people I've ever seen, even though she's in a very drab dress and her hair isn't like sexy yet or whatever. But, you get to know her, right? And
you care about what's happening to her. And you also see that she is being put upon by things that she is being treated unfairly. In this, Absolutely. You don't ever go, oh, wow, Poison Ivy's being treated really unfairly. I'm invested in her taking her revenge.
Yeah, and I would also just like to say, too, I know this isn't Batman Returns episode, but, we talked about that it is funny that, like, as an executive assistant or whatever her title is in Batman Returns, she's improbably hot. And I argued that I'm like, yes, she is, but I think she's such a talented actor that I actually start to buy her as insecure and
Mousy.
That is to the performance. And I can say in my own life, I can't speak for the listeners or whatever, but there are people that maybe behave insecurely or will tell you as such that are beautiful by conventional standards. And sometimes that's hard to do in movies. I'll give you an example. That stupid remake of Carrie, where they had that beautiful young actress, Chloe Grace
Moretz.
Yeah. And I'm like, yes, it's because she's so traditionally beautiful that I can't buy this, but she's also a terrible actress that I can't buy her as Carrie, so I just think it speaks to Tim Burton and Michelle Pfeiffer's execution of portraying somebody that is insecure, despite the fact that they're beautiful. In this, does that point make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. So like in this, it's everything you said, that she doesn't get a chance to show any depth or dimension. And that's the filmmaker's fault. Uma Thurman is a terrific actor. But I also think what the main problem is after the Max Schreck lookalike kills her for, I guess, rebuffing a partnership or a sexual advance. It's unclear really why he immediately turns on her. He has to telegraph to the audience what is that? Let the poisons and toxins create her. Let them burn a grave for you. You don't have Max Schreck going, let the concrete soak into your blood and kill you. He's satisfied that she is dead.
You're getting
and he
licked
walks
by
away.
cats and it's turning you into some sort of cat woman. You seem to have the powers of a cat.
Yes.
Look at them all licking you and turning you into...
Now you're having a seizure a little bit. Oh, yeah. I mean, it's so ridiculous in this part in particular because you could just tell they assembled the cast before they had a script written because that character who also creates Bane on the side for the Ununited Nations, I don't think we'll have time for that, but he narrates her death. She arises and in an attempt to explain why her skin is better and why she looks more beautiful after being buried alive in concrete and plants. She says that like her blood is aloe, blah, blah, blah. She narrates every single thought and movement that a character possibly could. She says, I was mistreated. Now I'm Mother Nature, blah, blah, blah. It's so insane how much characters have to telegraph what is happening to them. And all that leads her to want to pursue Bruce Wayne / Batman, even though it's never clear if she understands they're the same person, is she finds a beaker of chemicals in her lab and says, I guess we're going to Gotham. I think that's what makes this character. And Uma Thurman is trying to channel Michelle Pfeiffer's performance, who does play it big with a little bit of that old Hollywood kind of talk, but you buy it with Michelle Pfeiffer. At least I do. With Uma, she's doing that. She's trying her ass off. She's making a lot of choices. I don't know that she's working super hard, but I think that is why they stand in such stark contrast to one another.
Yeah, I agree. I'm glad we talked about that scene because to me it was such a pale ripoff of a scene that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me in Batman Returns, but is really effective in its like vibe and just kind of resonance when you're watching that movie.
There's no dialogue.
I mean, we talked about my favorite scene in the movie Batman Returns is her coming home and trashing her apartment.
And making the suit, and there's zero narrative dialogue, and you get it. And I mean, it's like Tim Burton is certainly not somebody that I would say is an expert in show don't tell, but he might be actually, and I think that's why his movies aren't great because there's not enough telling. But all that to say, in such stark contrast, there's no dialogue, and it's Walker's favorite scene in the movie. It's one of my favorite as well. So yeah, I could go on and on, but
Okay, so the thing that we cannot leave this episode without talking about is this is the second of this franchise that you and I saw in the theater, or did we?
Well, we
Not
saw
such-
a section of it, didn't we?
Yeah, we saw more of it than, I'll tell you what, we saw more of it than I thought we did. Based on the timestamp where a certain scene came up. We saw about 40 minutes of this movie in the theater, which made this memory sadder to me that we made it that far in, kind of.
Oh, see, that's where I marked it in my mind. It was about 40 minutes in, just under an hour.
Oh, see, in my memory, it's kind of like the first thing that I remember. But I'm obviously beating around the bush to tell a story that Zach is well aware of. But we were dropped off at the movie theater to see this movie. Now, this is
so far adorable memory that we got dropped off to do a big boy trip.
Yes, exactly. Now you're 10, I'm 10, you're 7. Us being dropped off at a movie theater to go see something by ourselves, not something I remember happening before, and not something I have a lot of memories of happening afterwards, and maybe this is why.
Yeah, maybe.
But I mean, this is a PG-13 movie, is it not?
Uh-huh. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So Zach and I went to see this movie. Now, I said I remember there is a scene in this movie where there is one of these like celebrity events that
it's
normally
a human auction, I think.
Yeah, it's very comfortable auctioning off women.
It's so crazy.
Yeah, it's a charity event where dates with these different women are often auctioned off to wealthy participants,
white billionaires.
Yeah, wealthy white billionaires. It's great. It's great, and how far we've come. And what's weird about this scene, also, I will just say, is that normally this would be where you get to see Bruce Wayne kind of do his Bruce Wayne thing, but in this case, Batman and Robin show up to the event, which I was like, what kind of Watchmen ass shit is this?
I know, it's
these
so
superheroes
weird.
doing a PR event. But in any case, at this auction, a figure appears in a giant gorilla costume, and Poison Ivy's theme,
disconcerting,
which is like kind of, sexy horn music, starts to do a sort of a striptease out of this gorilla costume. First, a gorilla hand is taken off. You see the very sexy green fingernailed hand.
Yeah, Joel Schumacher's like, this is what men like, right? It's like, no, dude, this is not.
Slowly, this gorilla costume is revealed to show that it is, in fact, Poison Ivy. And Poison Ivy has sent her, like, love dust into the crowd, which makes the men all infatuated with her. This is all real from the movie, if you haven't seen it, by the way. It sounds like I'm making this shit up.
It sounds like you're on acid.
Right. But again, it's never explained what the properties of this chemical compound are, but it's, narratively it functions as a love potion. Now, Zach and I, when this scene started, as a 10 and 7-year-old boy, I walked us out of the theater and we left, and I went up to the person working at the movie theater and had them call our mom to come pick us up because I knew that this was a naughty scene. Now, this breaks my heart on a few different levels. One is just the level of obedience that was instilled within me, that because this scene is so effing tame. I mean, it was literally, Zach, as much as I can get in the mind of me at that age, I know that what made me make us leave was the signifiers of something sexy happening.
I think it was when she drops the ape costume.
I remember. Well, what's so funny is that's probably where we left, but my red alert went up with the glove coming up.
Oh, okay.
And it was because of the music. It's like, because we learn that film vocabulary as as kids, right? Like Ollie, I'll watch a movie with him and he doesn't need to see something scary. He knows if something he doesn't want to see because it's scary is happening because of the music and the way it's shot.
Right.
And I knew something sexy was happening because of the music and the way it was shot. And from the second that glove came off, I was like, we're in trouble.
Sure. Can I tell you externally from you, but internal to the story?
Yes. How did you experience and do this, and do you remember it? Because I do remember it in a very palpable way.
Well, the reason why I say that you were like telling me we got to go, like Ian Malcolm, we got to go right now, was after she drops the ape costume, because it does, start from like below her, even though it's it's like below her, but like she's on top of a ledge. So you're meant to be like a face in the crowd, and then it pans up. And this is one of the only ass shots we get of Uma Thurman. And I remember seeing that because in my mind, the way I remember it is that the camera is much closer on her. Right. So it's funny. So again, memory is not foolproof or whatever, but I know that we made it that far into the scene because I always remember that shot incorrectly is what I mean to say. That's why it's so burned into my mind.
Well, it sounds like
that it is.
I'm not even teasing you. It sounds like you were keyed in on her butt then as a little kid. But you remember that as the whole shot.
Well, yes, but I was only seven years old. And so, for me personally, I don't remember being titillated by that. Even though like I'm describing it that way, but I remember it being like more, as you just said, it's very tame. I remember it being even more in your face or whatever at the time. But I do remember that being like the last moment I saw, which is probably also why it's there. And I just remember you telling me we got to go and everything you just described. I don't need to retread. I do remember, and you should correct me on this if I'm wrong, not kind of grasping what the big deal was and wanting to stay.
I remember that too.
Okay.
I think I had to. Let
me pass it back over to you.
No, that's funny because I had forgotten that aspect. I think I kind of like dragged you out of the theater.
Yeah. I was like, this is Batman.
I was freaking out.
Yeah.
And I mean, it honestly, like, look, I think like we've made little like jokes here and there about just like having a very devout upbringing and things like that. And whatever your religious ideals are, or however strict or kind of loose you are, I certainly in my own parenting, from a very non-religious point of view, I try to like practice common sense, discretion and common sense about like exposing my young kid to things that are overtly sexual or violent, whatever. So I get all that. What makes me kind of sad about it is, as bad as this movie is, I know we would have enjoyed it at the time. And I feel like it's like because of the conditioning that I had about anything remotely sexual in any way being bad, and I'm bad if I see it, and I'm in trouble if I watch it. It's like I underwent the fucking Ludvigo treatment. Is that what it's called in Clockwork Orange? Like it's like
the Ludvigo.
I heard sexy music and saw a woman's hand and acted in revulsion as if I'd had my eyelids pried open, shown these images. People get the reference I'm making. It was like, wow, I had no will of my own to like, self-regulate. Hey, is this okay? And can I see this? And it was like, because in my memory, I know you're right. It wasn't, I saw the unsheathed sexy hand and pull this out. But in my memory,
that was when the alarm bells.
From that second, I was like going, we need to get out of here.
Yeah. And you probably passed it on to me 8 seconds later when it does that shot up. And Walker, you had just strongly invoked Clockwork Orange. Listeners, I sent photographic evidence of the fact that Alex in his droogs, and I'm talking about just the iconic costuming in A Clockwork Orange, are shown as extras in this film during the bike race scene. That was probably a weird interjection, but there's never been a better time, which I just find to be so funny that Schumacher's like, hey, remember that really good movie that came out made by somebody else? Well, here are the characters from it.
They say never reference a better movie in your shitty movie. The Droogs are also shown in Space Jam 2: A New Legacy because that movie. I pray that you never do. It's literally one of the worst. It's worse than Batman and Robin. But in that movie, it was made shortly after all the Warner Brothers IP was purchased by the same.
Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe not. Anyway,
when they merged with HBO and stuff.
Yes, and so they take and a bunch of other things because there are multiple scenes where they go, we're literally just going to show every intellectual property that we own, to the point that in one scene, Pennywise from It and the Droogs from Clockwork Orange are just hanging for no reason whatsoever, hanging out in the background of this kids movie. It's like, hey, you know why you come to a Looney Tunes movie, 8-year-olds? To see this fucking pack of violent rapists depict in a Kubrickian dystopia in a movie that was banned and rated, unfairly in my opinion, but banned and rated X at the time because of how severe its content is. Yeah, let's throw that into this Bugs Bunny cartoon.
That is so strange.
But yeah, I mean, I don't know. Do you have any other aspects of this memory? Because was I crying when Mom picked us up?
I definitely was not gonna. I was gonna let you release that. Yeah, but yeah,
I think we should put it all out there.
I remember you crying. Yeah, and again, this is not to make it sound like I've always been such a hey, no big deal. I'm very uptight and remain uptight about a lot of things. But I think
you were I was a more externally emotional kid for sure.
Yeah, and I just would say I remember that, and I don't remember being that.
So were we just, because I also, here's the other thing I remember is the darkness of the theater, and then waiting on the corner and the beating sun.
I remember
Mom
that too.
To come get us.
I completely So I mean, this just goes to show you, listeners, you should compare notes, because sometimes memories are wildly off from each other, and sometimes they're directly in line. And this is not something we talked about leading up to Off Pod. It's come up in the past, but not a lot. And so that is exactly my memory. I just want to say, I just talked about. I'm not going to objectify anyone if you hear that in my tone. Uma Thurman, absolutely gorgeous woman then and now. I find it so funny that in my memory, because that was the inciting moment where you said, hey, we got to go, that this is the only shot of a woman's ass besides Batgirl getting ready. And I think it just goes to show that Joel Schumacher's perception of what men are interested in didn't have a lot of additional input, because like I said, Uma Thurman is beautiful. She's not voluptuous, Rubenesque type figure. And in fact, one might usually, Quentin Tarantino tends to focus on her hindquarters. Instead, he's focusing on her hair and her shoulders through all the moments she's supposed to be super
and
erotic.
Her hands.
And her hands. And I'm just kind of dude, I don't need you to objectify this person, but you can tell he's trying to and failing.
Hey, he for all that, he did not fail to signify horniness to 10-year-old me, because I started crying and got us out there. And all of this goes to say, we sometimes get personal on this show, but I just thank God that I feel like I have a healthy relationship to my sexuality now as an adult, because I certainly did not as a child. But it does make sense out of why I've never been able to go to a strip club without bursting into tears. So it's nice to finally kind of have this memory sort of unsheath itself and why I've been so scared of titties all my life.
Well, I just would like to say, too, though, just to be serious and go back a step, you mentioned that you use discretion in the movies that you show to your 9-year-old son. And for whatever it's worth, I've totally noticed that. And I think it's really impressive, right? I mean, because movies can be so, you mentioned that your son has he picks up on the signifiers if something's going to be scary. I would just like to encourage people to use discretion when allowing, what movies you let your children see, but also to kind of leave it up to them. I think gives children more of an ability to be honest about what scares them and what they're uncomfortable with. I will say, having had and mom and dad, if you're listening, this is not an attack on you at all, but having had like what I watch be very tightly scrutinized, I wanted to watch anything of any genre, of any type, of any rating, if it was allowed. And when I was very scared by stuff, or when I was really freaked out or whatever, uncomfortable, I wouldn't say, because getting to see a movie was such a treat. So, that's just really interesting to me. And I would just say, I've seen with your son, him being like, I'm scared, I don't want to watch this. He's not embarrassed to admit it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because like what he sees is not entirely up to him. He's not gonna, I don't know.
Yes.
So yeah, that would be my observation, and what I would encourage folks to do when kind of is like put a little bit of the decision making back, and you might get a more honest response. That's all I would say.
Yes. Yeah. Or I watch stuff with my kid, and there will be like, again, while I will not put on something that I that's too that
Right.
I think is going to be too adult.
He's not going to watch Clockwork Orange tonight.
He's not going to watch Clockwork Orange, but we'll watch like a Billy Madison or something like that. Like, these movies that have like sometimes very like have jokes that I have come to not appreciate or whatever at the expense of somebody else, or the female characters only exist as villains or objects of desire or whatever. And sometimes there has been stuff we've watched where I'll pause and go, I think this is kind of bad, and here's why.
Yeah, you said you might watch Big tonight. Get ready for a few opportunities to do that.
Big, I'm probably going to hold off on because it's like, because a boy has sex with a woman. So yeah. But like, there has been stuff where I'm just like, okay, I actually, it's incumbent upon me to say something here because because the messaging here is so harmful.
Mm-hmm.
There's more times than that. All I have to do is kind of look over and see that he's uncomfortable and just go, are you feeling kind of weird?
Yeah.
And he'll go, yeah. And I'll say why. And that will facilitate a great conversation. So
sure.
While I'm not intentionally showing him things that make him feel weird, I do think that there's a lot of empowerment as a parent in just letting weird stuff exist, or letting art be seen that does sometimes hold up or not, or invoke weird feelings or not, and being willing to like field those conversations. Because this movie is way less sexual than Batman Forever, which we also saw in the theater, and I didn't feel scared and like I needed to get up out of the theater because we were with our dad.
Because Drew Barrymore made your favorite.
Drew Barrymore did make my favorite, and but you know what I'm saying? Like, it's like there's something about
I totally do.
The crime. It was like the thought crime I had committed was that I was seeing something horny outside of adult supervision, and that's why I was. That's why I was scared and made us leave, and why I was crying when our mom came and picked us up, because it was like I'm out here on my own sinning, basically.
And your younger brother, notorious snitch. So you thought if we don't leave, Zach's going to go home and snitch that we saw butt cheeks.
I love that. I love that you were just like perplexed as to why I was making us leave, and I
love Batman so much. I didn't want to miss it.
Yeah, you know what? And I never realized that all this was coming around to me making an apology to you for ruining this movie for us. What a little bitch.
No. Hey, of all the movies to have ruined, this one is not ruinable. I mean, honestly, and please, again, I'm looking to you because you're a little older, might have stronger memory. I don't remember how I felt. I remember internally being a little bummed out. I don't think we got into a fight about that like it led to. I remember, and I know we want to move a little quicker here, but I do remember that Bane, his transformation and subsequent appearance in the film scared me. And I will say, this is maybe the one little point I'll give for this movie. I think this movie, while the CGI is very dated and not well used, I think Bane's transformation is an interesting scene in terms of animation. I mentioned Roger Rabbit, the police cars, and that scene
effectively disturbing.
It is, and there's something about a 90s aesthetic, not just Tim Burton, but 90s in general, where I think that the tangible realism and also how fake it looks blends to something that elicits a stronger response. We could talk about that in another episode, another time, off pod or not, but I just wanted to quickly say, I remember being a little alarmed too, but wanting to stick with the movie because it was a new Batman movie. That's all. So I think maybe, it
no,
could have been a greater
I
fight.
I think that it was hard to get you to leave, but you ultimately acquiesced to my authority as the older brother.
Oh yeah.
But anyway, I hope the listeners enjoy that super personal story. But I felt like this Batman Idiobat started with us going, Zach watched 1989 Batman every day for a year. It feels appropriate that it ends with us going, Walker dragged him and his brother out of the theater because like 1.5 inches of butt cheek were on the screen. Dragged him out of the theater crying. I was crying because I saw it, but you were crying inside because you weren't getting to see Batman.
Yeah, and listeners, for more in-depth personal stories related to our sexuality, how Batman may have influenced our partners, that's behind the Patreon. So we'll get to that. But anything else you want to talk about?
I think we should get out of here on let's get out of here on a light positive.
Oh, okay.
One thing I will say about this movie, Arnold Schwarzenegger, whether intentionally through his performance or not, did make me laugh out loud a few times in this movie. Do you want to just like real quick, like lightning round, hit me with some of your favorite Mr. Freeze lines or moments in this movie? Because Arnold puns are a big part of Arnold Schwarzenegger's movie career, and they fold that into this movie. So Mr. Freeze speaks almost exclusively in ice or cold related puns. But what, if any, are some of your favorite Mr. Freeze one-liners or Arnold deliveries or anything at all? Because he made me laugh out loud multiple times.
Well, before I tell you my puns, I just want to tell you my favorite Arnold Mr. Freeze moment of the film. And I was pleased with this observation because there's a scene after they have their big fight. It's your first villain on the side in their lair scene, like you would get with Two-Face, in the previous film or something like that. And what's happening in this $150 million movie is he's telling his goons, sing, and they're not singing. They're just making duh kind of caveman noises. And I was like, why in this $100 million movie where we've seen all the money on display and the costumes and the, albeit poor execution, we saw a lot of CGI in their first battle, why will these goons not sing? And it's because they're extras. And if you have an extra that has no speaking lines, then they're not in SAG. And so somebody in this $150 million movie on the side, I'm speculating, was like, don't give them any speaking lines. Don't allow them to sing, even though the main character is telling them to sing because we'll have to pay residuals if they do. So that is the kind of money they're looking to save on this movie is we'll spend it for them to go air surfing, but not for these characters to get any speaking lines because we want to save on the residuals. And that leads into the Vivica Fox, which is my other favorite funny moment. But I didn't mean to hog it so much, but that is the Arnold observation that isn't a pun. I don't know. How about you?
Well, I don't really have a favorite pun. They're all terrible. I mean, like they're literally like, he's always going like, this has left me cold, or like, I mean, what else? Like,
I have one specific.
Yeah,
in their battle, when he goes, "What killed the dinosaurs? The Ice Age." It's so funny.
Which is that true?
No, a meteor killed the dinosaurs, which then caused an entire dust cloud over the Earth, which then eventually, because it was blocked from the sun, killed them. But
so the Ice Age
is 80% responsible for the destruction.
So thank you, because I was just like, he says multiple things that I'm
the Ice Age,
and also when he goes, in this world, there is only one absolute. Everything freezes. And I'm like, is that
what are you
true?
talking about? That's not true.
I don't know if any of the stuff he's saying is true. And he's a scientist and decathlete.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's always talking in puns to the point that I literally can't think of a second one other than "you have left me cold" is one, but they're all variations
Hell,
on
freeze is over.
Yes.
Freeze in hell, Batman.
Freeze in hell. To the point that he delivers things that are not puns in the tone as if they're puns. There's one part where he goes, "Nice of you to drop in." And it's like, that isn't a pun, but he said it like it's a pun. Also, there's a part where he says, "Very nice." And I wish he went, "Very ice." Because that was a missed opportunity.
A pun that he gives that's not a pun at all, but he delivers as if it has that punch is when he goes. By the way, Mr. Freeze goes to jail midpoint in this movie. It's very odd storytelling. But when he goes to jail, one of the bodyguards at Arkham is Jesse the Body Ventura, who he acted with in Predator. But there's these two foolhardy goons who are at a minimum 7 foot tall, because Arnold is 6'4" or was, right? And they're much taller and bigger than him. And he goes, they're like, I can't remember the line exactly, but he's like, I will enjoy my stay here after I escape, which you won't get to see. It's like the weirdest, like, compound negative.
Unfortunately, you will not live to see it.
It's so strange, and which they do, by the way. Oh no, they get killed by poison ivy. But yeah, there's that, and I think those are the only other. My favorite Arnold. This is the last one I have. In the scene where he breaks up Poison Ivy's undressing party, which is where we left. He interrupts that party. They briefly decide to partner up for no reason, but there's a drink tray that is like the main prop of the movie for this scene, where Batman's throwing it at goons, all this and that. But while that drink tray scene is happening, Mr. Freeze is talking to Poison Ivy, and he goes, and this is just because of Arnold's accent, and he goes, well, that's my cue to exit, which is how you'd say it in like theater studio parlance. You could say that's my cue to exit, but coming from Arnold, it sounds so weird. And I'm like, why did they design that line to make it sound like somebody who, why not say like, there's my exit cue or whatever? I don't know. The way he delivers it is so bad. And that was my favorite moment. Maybe you had to be their moment, but that was it.
But my favorite Arnold moment is similarly not a pun. Because here's the thing I'll say about Arnold. Like, plenty of hay has been made about the fact that he's a terrible actor just in our culture.
Sure.
Obviously has been used to great effect in the right role, but he, in the conventional sense, and I would say in kind of the real sense, he is very bad at acting. But he super commits. Yes. And so what I find is somebody who is so bad at emoting in the way that you need an actor to, but is so committed, he always kind of looks crazy. Mm-hmm. Like he makes really crazy faces and has really crazy eyes. And so there's a part where I think it's pretty early on in the movie, all his goons are on ice skates and doing hockey.
Yes.
At Batman and Robin. My note about that, by the way, was I haven't seen this much hockey in a movie since Clerks. But anyway, while they're all doing ice hockey, at one point it just cuts to Arnold. He's got his arms outstretched. He has the craziest look on his face ever. And he goes, yes, kill them, kill them. Yeah!
And then he says, destroy everything. And it's like, fucking why? Why would they destroy everything? Including the diamond you need?
He's so crazed in that moment. I loved it so much. Also, I will say, in terms of like him being crazed, there's a monologue he delivers about like blanketing the world in ice. And I got to tell you, anything with genocidal overtones coming out of that face with that accent, I was like, this is unsettling.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I had that thought as well, that I think Arnold, and this might be the note I would like to personally go out on. I'd love you to close this out. But Arnold is a registered Republican. He, a couple years back, gave this, I would venture to say, moving. Yes, he might not emote as a great actor by traditional sense. I would just like to quickly interject. I think when used properly, it can be terrific. And I'm thinking of the Terminator, but also Predator and stuff like that. But you want to say he's a bad actor. I don't know. Watch this video, listeners. He's encouraging his fellow Republicans to not engage in doing so many of the things that I would say the like far right-leaning conservatives do. And he says in this video, with a great deal of shame, that he basically implicates that his father was either cooperative with the Nazi Party because he was from Austria, which, as listeners will know, Nazi Germany took over Austria, but they were welcomed with open arms. And so he indicates that his father had a great deal of military shame. And he's saying, like, I've managed to put that behind me and I've had to overcome it directly. Do not, he's basically encouraging, the parts of the party that are engaged in Nazism not to do that. It's an amazing video. I wish more people would speak out like this. That said, I didn't even know that his linkage was that close. So when I was watching that too, of a person with a deeply, we'll just say, a German sounding accent talking about genocide, it was so disconcerting.
Yes. We will have 1,000-year Reich of ice and coldness. all of the humid fire people will be buried in our sheets of snow. Yeah, it was insane. Well, that's a weird note to end on.
Well, hey, I think that, like, we've self-sabotaged this episode and this movie as much as we could. We love to mirror the arc of Radiohead, who did not have an album in 1997, so we don't need to talk about them at all. Just kidding, listeners. But no, this movie is so baffling, and I tried to be a little bit analytical. I know you did too. But ultimately, it's just a big failure and a misfire. So I think the way we wrap up, it can be equally baffling as well.
Oh, I fucking hated it. And I hate Joel. and like, I have yet to see a good Joel Schumacher movie. And I'm kind of, at this point, pretty convinced that he is a hack.
He's dead.
Well, good riddance is what I say. And on that note, any final words?
No, not at all. I mean, this is the last episode of the podcast, right, Walker?
Yeah, well, we both have stage 1 McGregor's disease, or syndrome, depending on it's a disease or a syndrome if you're nasty. No, we'll be back next week, and we will be back to Idiotalk next week. This was the fourth and final. Well, I won't say final. This was the fourth and final for now episode of Idiobat. Mm-hmm. And who knows? We might need to discuss Batman again in the future, in which case we will bust our bat capes back out. Hopefully I will be able to do it without fucking crying. You know, hopefully I don't see a butt cheek or a little bit of cleavage, you know, because as we know, that will completely undo me. I really enjoyed talking about this with you, Zach, a lot more than I enjoyed watching it.
Mm-hmm. I had a great time.
Listeners, we hope you'll be back next week. I have been Walker Glenn.
I've been Zach Glenn.
See you next week. Bye. Idiotalk is a Glenn Brothers production. Get in touch with us at idiotalk.podcast@gmail.com or follow us on Instagram at idiotalk.podcast. And thanks for listening to